Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Marvel. I Became a God in American Comics. Chapter 21. Pierce said in a cold tone. Sitwell, you'd better give me an answer that satisfies me, otherwise I will send you to work for Madam Viper. A seductive figure with blonde hair and green clothes suddenly appeared in Sitwell's mind, and the whole person shuddered violently. He would rather die than go to that poisonous woman. Sir, I think that since we have no chance of winning against him head-on, we might as well show our goodwill to him in advance. For example, give him some items that can help him, or help him deal with some troubles, etc., to express our goodwill. Based on our analysis of him for more than 10 years, he is not the kind of superhero who is full of absolute justice and hates evil. If we have established a good relationship with him in advance, I believe that even if he finds out that it was Baron Strucker who attacked his people in the future. But as long as we sever our relationship with Baron Strucker, he should not make it too difficult for us. Sitwell finished speaking in one breath, looking at Pierce nervously, and praying in his heart that Pierce would be satisfied with this answer. After all, this was just a flash of inspiration, and it couldn't be said to be a high-level strategy. It could even be said that a fool could think of a method. Pierce stared blankly at the little bald man in front of him. For more than 10 years, he has always been wary and afraid of Arno Stark. Because his power is too strong, and his ability is too targeted at Hydra, an organization hidden in the dark. If it is as expected, the power of the God of the Earth in the comics will allow him to monitor almost the entire world. In other words, as long as he wants, he can find almost all the Hydra members hiding in the dark. After all, Hydra members like to shout, "Long live Hydra," when they meet. This is their slogan, and even he, the leader, can't change it. At most, he can let his men whisper in a low voice instead of shouting like Stella's stupid men. But no matter how low your voice is, it will be invisible in front of this existence that can hear the voices of the whole world. Of course, he can't be 100% sure that Arno's ability is exactly the same as Superman in the comics. But he didn't dare to bet. After all, judging from some of the abilities Arno has shown so far, he is too similar to Superman in the comics. Man of Steel, super strength, super speed, super flight, thermal vision. And most importantly, Arno Stark is absorbing solar rays to become stronger. This made him dare not bet that Arno did not have supervision and super hearing, the two abilities that he feared the most. Therefore, he listed Arno Stark as an existence that Hydra must not provoke more than a decade ago. Even Pierce did not allow his subordinates to mention this name, for fear that he would hear it. After more than a decade of fear, now you ask me why I don't make friends with him. Pierce was silent. Was he going to say that he had never thought of this method? This is the simplest and most direct method. After a long silence, Pierce waved his hand with mixed feelings. You go down first. From now on, try to cut off contact with Stark and slowly draw a line with them. Understood. X2. Crossbones and Sitwell breathed a sigh of relief and nodded to leave. They knew that Pierce's anger had subsided today. Especially Sitwell, he breathed a sigh of relief after leaving the house. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and felt like he had escaped death. He looked at Crossbones gratefully and said, "Thank you for today. I owe you a big favor." If Crossbones hadn't given him that punch that interrupted him from saying that name today, Pierce would have really killed him. Crossbones glanced at him with some disdain in his eyes. "I just don't want the entire Hydra to be buried with you because of your stupidity." After saying that, Crossbones walked into the open elevator first, and without waiting for Sitwell, whose face turned livid, to come in, he directly pressed the elevator's closing button. He has always disliked these civilian staff who have no fighting ability and like to give orders. Asshole. Bang. After the elevator went down, Sitwell couldn't help it anymore and punched the closed elevator door angrily. But he was only handsome for 2 seconds, the elevator door was intact, and Sitwell covered his broken fist with a grimacing pain. Facts have proved that Crossbones' idea is right. Stark Manor. Arno held the sleeping beauty in his arms with one hand and slowly landed. With the other hand, he casually threw Pietro, whose legs were weak, to the ground. Sleep where you fall. Pietro lies on the ground. I am still a wounded soldier. Brother Arnold, you are so serious. Is it really okay to be a friend of color? Arno looked down at him and said calmly, you still have the nerve to talk, a bunch of rubbish forced you to this. With your speed, you can kill them all with a knife. You deserve to have your legs pierced. It's useless to have such fast legs. Also, when you get better, I will settle with you for taking Wanda to Sokovia secretly, and not protecting her well, and asking her to protect you. After that, he no longer paid attention to Pietro, who couldn't walk, and walked into the medical villa with Wanda in his arms. Pietro helplessly reached out to Arno's back. "Oh no, I can't walk, do you really want me to crawl in?" Quote. His shouting was still useful. The maid with blonde hair and red clothes walked out of the villa, came to Pietro and stretched out her hand to him. "Kia, you are still the best." Pietro looked at the beautiful girl in front of him, showed a handsome smile and stretched out his hand. Then, he grabbed nothing again. Kia grabbed his collar, lifted Pietro up with one hand and walked towards the villa. "Hey, come on, again." Pietro covered his face, not wanting the maids along the way to see his embarrassing appearance. "Wow, yo, look what I found. Am I dazzled? Arnold is actually holding a woman." Tony, who was sitting in a wheelchair, turned his head and made an exaggerated scream to the little Pepper who was pushing him behind him. Although Tony's tone was exaggerated, the surprise in his eyes was real. Arnold had several girlfriends, but he had never seen his brother hugging a woman in public. "My girlfriend, Wanda, my future wife, is the same as your Pepper." Quote. Arno said bluntly. Tony was instantly counter-accused, and the teasing smile froze on his face. Lies are not sharp blades, the truth is. In one sentence, he controlled both of them. Pepper even forgot that she was pushing Tony. The wheelchair slid straight forward. Arno propped up the wheelchair with his legs and patted Tony's head. "Your brother is still your brother. You are still a little naive to talk to me." Handing the wheelchair to Pepper, who ran over with a red face, Arno felt more relaxed and carried Wanda into the medical room. "My brother is very popular with women, and his girlfriend is counted every day. But he seems timid when facing sincere feelings, not as good as a high school student." In the long corridor, only Tony and Pepper are left, and the atmosphere is a bit awkward. Neither of them knows how to start, and they are silent for a while. Fortunately, a burst of footsteps soon broke the awkward atmosphere between the two. Pietro was carried in by the red maid Kaya. The two injured, one sitting and the other hanging in the air, looked at each other. Pietro stared at Tony, breathing a little hurriedly. Tony didn't understand, but Pietro's eyes made him a little unhappy. "Why, man, why are you looking at me like that? Have I ever dated your girlfriend?" Pietro struggled for a moment, and finally took a deep breath to calm down the idea of beating the man in front of him. "Tony Stark, you'd better leave this manor as soon as possible, otherwise I can't guarantee that you will be completely in a wheelchair." Tony looked at the big hole in Pietro's leg and said contemptuously. "You look like this, I think it's not me who should consider whether you will be completely in a wheelchair, but you, the silver-haired boy. I have reminded you that although I have let you go, my sister may not." Pietro was carried into the medical room by Kia. Before the door closed, he looked at Tony deeply and left a sentence. Tony turned his head and stared at the closed door and frowned. He pressed a hidden button under the armrest of the wheelchair. Suddenly, a blue virtual projection appeared in front of Tony. "Jarvis, check the information of that silver-haired boy. I want to know why he is so unhappy with me." "Okay, sir, I am checking for you." If he were outside, he would ignore people like Pietro who were somewhat hostile to him. After all, there are countless people who are jealous and unhappy with him. If he investigates everyone who is unhappy with him, he will have to stay up all day for 24 hours. But this silver-haired boy is different. He is a member of Arno Manor. There is only one kind of people in Arno Manor. One's own people. Or family. Rather than saying that this is a rich man's manor, it is better to say that this is a big family. From the red-clothed butler to the ordinary chef. They were all picked up by Arno from outside. Each of them is a helpless orphan. Although they are usually respectful to Arno who gave them a good life. But in fact, Arno never treated them as servants. Everyone is free in the manor. This is the home of each of them. Sometimes he envied his brother for having such a warm home. But his personality prevented him from building a big family like Arno. After all, he was a technical geek. Apart from nightlife, he preferred to stay alone and do research. It was because of this that Tony wanted to find out why the silver-haired boy had a hint of hatred in his eyes. He couldn't let a hidden danger who hated the Stark family stay with Arno. Sir, this is the information about Pietro Maximoff that we found. Pictures and information appeared in front of Tony. Sokovian, orphans, smuggled here, really far away, living on illegal work and rescue until they disappeared 4 years ago, and they have a sister. Tony was stunned and recognized that his sister in the information was the girl who was just carried in by Arno. That's right, Arnold likes to pick up orphans everywhere. It doesn't make sense for him to pick up a boy and not his sister. But this information is useless. Jarvis, just search for information related to Stark in their files. Suddenly, the picture was reduced to 1 page. Maximov brothers and sisters, their parents died in the rebel riots in 1999. There was only a simple line of words, with a black and white photo. A missile stood in the ruins. And it was marked, Stark Industries. Pepper was also a little shocked when she saw this scene behind Tony. Oh my God, Tony's parents. Tony's original chest shrapnel was removed and his joy of returning to normal suddenly became heavy. He touched his chest. Although the shrapnel there was no longer there, he felt that his heart was heavier, as if there was something more. That thing is, responsibility. Tony's eyes gradually became firm. Although he was lucky enough to survive the missile made by Stark, many more people would be killed by the weapons he made. At that moment, he made up his mind. He wanted to destroy all the Stark industrial weapons that fell into the hands of terrorists. He would do it himself. Although if he told Arno about this, he believed that Arno would deal with these things. But it was his own poor management that led to the weapons of Stark Industrial falling into the hands of terrorists. Arno handed the company to him, but he failed to manage it well. This is his responsibility, so he must finish these things himself. He can't let more children like Maximoff brothers and sisters lose their loved ones because of the weapons he made. And the premise of doing all this is to complete the Mark II. Pepper, go back to the villa. But your injury is not healed yet, you should stay in the manor to recuperate. No, go back now, right away. In the end, Pepper couldn't resist Tony's firm eyes and could only push him into the car. As the sports car drove away, Arno stood at the window of the ward and watched Tony's figure going away silently. Grow up, Tony, just do it, don't worry about what you do. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes. I will help. Arno retracted his gaze and looked at Wanda, who was sleeping on the bed with a frown on her face. The doctor has diagnosed that it is just overconsumption, nothing serious, just a headache for a while, just rest more and it will be fine. But it doesn't look like nothing is wrong. Arno held Wanda's palm, and sure enough, a faint energy on the surface of her body was floating. Is this the power that Wanda wants to detonate in the end? Arno was thoughtful. When he arrived, the powerful force that was about to explode in Wanda's body was obviously not a force that she could control. This power gave him the feeling that it was more like an energy body with independent consciousness lodged in Wanda's body, and Wanda could only control a small part of it. When Wanda had plenty of energy, her consciousness could still dominate. But once the energy she could control was exhausted and she fell into a coma, the hidden energy in her body began to want to turn over and become the master. However, this energy seemed to be afraid of me, and it became quiet when it met me. This was good news, at least I didn't have to worry about her losing control when I was with Wanda. Wanda had just awakened, and there was plenty of time. When she slowly mastered this energy, there would be no problem. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. Arno smoothed Wanda's brow. The sun shone on the two of them from the window, covering them with a golden coat. Everything was beautiful. Oh woo, if Pietro's scream like Tomcat in the next ward was excluded, it might be better. Time flies. 1 month later. According to relevant sources, in the past 10 days, the weapons of Stark Industries that fell into the hands of terrorists due to poor management have been attacked for the 15th time. The attacker not only destroyed the weapons in the hands of many terrorists, but also rescued countless civilians held hostage by terrorists. The attacker was accidentally photographed by the survivors and revealed to be a golden red robot. This picture immediately caused widespread heated discussion and attention. The golden red robot was also affectionately called Iron Man by people. And such a high-tech robot, coincidentally, appears in the territory of terrorists with Stark industrial weapons every time, which makes people imagine it. And today, Tony Stark, the current president of Stark Industries, will also come to the press conference. I believe he will give us a satisfactory answer. Let us wait and see. A blonde beauty is in front of the Stark press conference stage, broadcasting the upcoming hot topics to the live broadcast. Buzz buzz buzz. The familiar roar of a sports car was heard again. A silver Audi R8 entered the scene in a high-profile manner and stopped at the roadside with an almost 360 degrees drift. The reporters who were still reporting instantly ran towards the R8 at the speed of a 100-meter sprint like a cat smelling blood. As we all know, Tony Stark loves Audi R8. Today is another press conference held by Stark Industries. There is only one person who entered the scene in such a high-profile manner. Tony Stark, this hotly discussed figure who combines talent, romance, and money. The reporters couldn't wait to stick the long microphone above the driver's seat. Just waiting to record Tony's first words after getting off the car and get the first interview quota. Even if Tony Stark's first words after getting off the car were swear words, it would be a big fortune for them. The enthusiasm of the reporters couldn't even be stopped by the security at the scene. It was really because their microphone poles were too long and stretched directly over a few meters away. The driver's door opened, but Tony Stark's arrogant handsome face did not appear as expected. A flashy red buttocks first stretched out of the driver's seat and appeared in everyone's eyes. Hey, good morning, noon and evening guys, I'm Tony Stark, I feel your fiery enthusiasm, and I'm happy to see you all. The exposed red big buttocks swayed, and a deliberately low bubbling male voice came from the car. The whole audience was silent instantly. Who are you? Do you think we are blind? This is obviously not Tony Stark. Although Tony Stark is famous for being unruly, he would not be so indecent. But obviously not everyone realized that the red big buttocks in the car were not Tony Stark. For example, a young man with a Bugle Daily sign on his body, although he didn't understand why his colleagues present were quiet after Tony Stark appeared. But he saw that no one was competing with him for the interview opportunity, and he couldn't help but get a little too excited. He wanted to squeeze through the crowd and move forward, but his legs got tangled together. As a result, the long microphone in his hand poked straight at the big butt that was exposed from the car door. Boos. Ah. Deadpool covered his butt, rolled out of the R8 with a howl, and rolled on the ground with his butt covered. Who exploded my first time today? If you have the guts, stand up. Deadpool relieved the local discomfort, rubbed his butt, climbed up, and drew out his 2 knives. He stared fiercely at the many reporters with long guns and short guns. Everyone was shocked by his power and took a step back, leaving only the young man from the Bugle Daily who had a bubble in his brain standing there stupidly. Deadpool grabbed his collar, put the knife on his neck, pulled the microphone from the young man's hand and took a deep breath. Yes, that's the smell, you're the one who blew my ass. The young man had never seen such a scene before, and he was trembling with fear. Mr. Stark, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Your brain is even more problematic than mine. Do I look like Tony Stark's face that deserves a beating? The young man looked at the red mask with rich expressions weakly. I think you look like Tony Stark too. What nonsense is this young man talking about? Deadpool was speechless, and he pulled up his hood to reveal his fried sandy face that was enough to scare a child to tears. Unexpectedly, the young man in his hand was not scared at all. When he saw Deadpool's face, his eyes rolled up and he fainted. Young people today need to improve their psychological quality. Deadpool put the mask back on and took the badge on the young man's chest to look at it. Eddie Brock, a good name, I hope you didn't let a slimy tentacle monster target you next time. Deadpool casually threw Eddie onto a fat reporter, jumped onto the press conference platform in 2 or 3 steps, and clapped his hands. Ladies and gentlemen, follow my lead. Quote, after everyone's attention was focused, Deadpool picked up the microphone on the platform. Although I am not Tony Stark, I will host today's press conference. You can call me Little Deadpool affectionately. When the reporters saw Tony didn't come, everyone's faces suddenly showed dissatisfaction. If the real boss didn't come, then the big news would be gone. There was no need to think that the press conference sent by the assistant was all official rhetoric. They could guess the result before it started. And Tony Stark was too disrespectful to them. In the past, it was his secretary Pepper Potts who hosted it. This time, he actually sent a tights pervert to fool them. But Stark Industries is so powerful that they dare not offend him easily, otherwise if they say something wrong, their own company might be ruined. Who wants to see you, a pervert in tights? Where is Tony Stark? He, the host, doesn't show up at such a big press conference. Quote. Everyone looked at the old white man who spoke in surprise. Good boy, you have courage, the guy from the newspaper, so brave. Mr. Stark is busy with something important now, you know, so if you have any questions, you can ask me first, and I will answer them for you. Deadpool was not angry when he heard it, but made a few gestures that everyone understood with one hand and a zero with one hand. At this moment, Tony was like a red sword, flying out of a round explosion flame, and he sneezed under the mask, who is saying bad things about me. It's useless to ask you, what do you know, a pervert in a tights. Let Tony Stark come out. The old white man in the audience didn't buy it, and gave Deadpool a middle finger. Wow, this gesture is too unfriendly, it's easy to teach children bad things, is this friend too low quality for a reporter? Quote. It's none of my business. I'm not a reporter, I'm just passing by. After saying that, the old white man who had been arguing with Deadpool walked out of the reception in a swagger. Shut up, Stan Lee. Deadpool could no longer bear it and yelled at the old white man who left in style. But the only response he got was the international gesture of the cool back. Everyone, please make way. At this time, a fat man and several security guards escorted Pepper through the crowd and walked onto the stands. Pepper took the microphone from Deadpool without hesitation and smiled professionally to everyone. Sorry, everyone, this is just a joke. I will host today's reception. If you have any questions, you can ask them in an orderly manner. I will answer them as appropriate. The arrival of Pepper made the atmosphere on the scene obviously warmer. Deadpool looked at the enthusiastic people at the scene with dissatisfaction. You are treating him differently, this is discrimination. Unfortunately, no one cared about his mood. Happy and several security guards directly lifted his hands and feet and carried him down. The reporters present were very happy about this. Compared to this pervert in a red tights who farts all the time, Pepper Potts, who is obviously Tony Stark's personal secretary, is more convincing to them and knows more. The first blonde reporter to report asked the question. Ms. Potts, is it true that the terrorists recently circulated that weapons made by Stark Industries appeared in their hands? Pepper paused with the microphone, then slowly spoke. It's true. On behalf of Mr. Stark, I would like to apologize to the people who have been hurt. This is indeed due to our negligence. For this, Mr. Stark has set up a disaster relief department. All victims or their families can come to Stark Tower or contact us online to verify and receive the corresponding compensation. I know that this can't change anything. You can continue to hate us or scold us, but the dead are gone, and the living should live well. Not to mention the heart, but Mr. Stark, and I hope that at least this compensation can make your material life better. Finally, I'm sorry. Pepper finished the last sentence and bowed deeply to all the cameras of the reporters. This passage and the picture were also broadcast live by many TV stations. The whole place was dead silent. None of them expected Stark Industries to admit this directly. In their expectation, Stark Industries should have excused themselves with various reasons. Then Miss Potts, may I ask if there is any inside story about this matter? Why did Stark Industries have a weapons leak? It was still the blonde reporter. When the other reporters reacted, they all looked at her with resentful eyes. She alone took up 2 questions. But who made them just shocked by what Pepper said? Pepper straightened up, took out a manuscript, and then tore it up and threw it on the ground. Although in order to avoid unnecessary panic, the relevant people gave me a perfect explanation. But it is wrong. The weapons appeared in the hands of terrorists, not because of spies or other things, but because the directors of Stark Industries jointly sold them to terrorists. Led by the third shareholder Obadiah Stani, half of the directors participated in it. And they will not only be fired, but also held accountable by Stark Industries for this. At the end, Pepper's eyes were a little complicated. It was fired, but it was a direct expulsion. Holding accountable means exchanging their shares for money and using them for disaster relief departments. The relevant people in the audience, Coulson looked at the torn manuscript helplessly. This is the perfect explanation that I spent a day and a night to edit. But he dared not have any dissatisfaction. After all, the director repeatedly warned him not to make Stark Industries unhappy again. The last agent who did this is still working as a laborer for them. Excuse me, what does Stark Industries think of Iron Man, who destroyed more than a dozen terrorist bases in a row? Finally, the other reporters waited for the opportunity to ask questions, and they immediately mentioned the most talked about Iron Man. Chili Pepper regained her calm expression. As for this Iron Man, I know almost the same as everyone else. In my personal opinion, he is a righteous man, but Stark Industries will not comment on this. But every time the terrorist base attacked by Iron Man has weapons made by Stark Industries, how does Stark Group explain this? Can we guess that Iron Man is the latest robot developed by Stark Industries, an advanced weapon specially made for clearing out and retaliating against terrorists who have Stark weapons? Why didn't Mr. Tony Stark attend the reception? Does he have a close relationship with Iron Man, or is he the one who made Iron Man? If this robot is made by Stark Industries, will it be included in your arms sales in the future? Excuse me. As soon as the hot topic of Iron Man came out, the reporters at the scene no longer cared about order. One question after another was asked, but without exception, they were all about Iron Man. Pepper faced the noisy scene and many questions with a blank expression. Of course she knew that Tony was Iron Man, and Iron Man was not a robot at all. It was an iron suit, a revenge weapon driven by Tony himself. Since Tony came back, even though he had just finished the operation and was still recovering, he was designing his Mark II day and night. After he had been almost sleepless for 20 days, he finally made the Mark II. In the face of her strong opposition, Tony, who was still injured, put on the cold armor. Tony's revenge also began from then on. She raised her watch and tapped it lightly, and a map emerged. A small red dot on the map moved towards her at a very fast speed. Everyone, I can't answer the question about Iron Man, but someone can. Chili's tone was not heavy, but it made the scene quiet instantly. Many reporters breathed rapidly, and their eyes were about to pop out. Their professional sense of smell made them smell a big news that was about to explode the whole world. Chili took 2 steps back and raised her hand slightly. Let us invite Iron Man himself to answer this question for everyone. Bang! As soon as the voice fell, the red and gold figure fell from the sky to the stage at a very fast speed. Oh my God, the superhero has landed. Look at the superhero landing. Deadpool in the audience slapped Happy next to him hard and screamed. I swear if you dare to slap me again, I will slap you in the face with my stinky leather shoes that I haven't washed for 10 years. Happy looked unhappy. He was already extremely disgusted with the guy who had taken his job as Tony's personal bodyguard. But now he had no time to slap him in the face with his stinky leather shoes, and he was staring at the Iron Man on the stage. He had a vague feeling that he had completely lost his role as a bodyguard. Amid the exclamations of the audience, the Iron Man slowly stood up. The iron mask opened, revealing Tony's resolute face. I am Iron Man. Stark Industries President Tony Stark, wearing an iron armor, descended from the sky at the press conference today and said frankly that he is the recently hotly discussed Iron Man. He also said that this armor was born for revenge and justice. In the future, if one more bullet of Stark Industries weapons falls into the hands of terrorists, he will completely destroy the entire terrorist force. If you dare, just try it. He keeps his word. And Tony Stark announced that the iron armor will never be included in the list of weapons sold by Stark Industries. Iron Man is him, he is the unique Iron Man. In the dark room, a bearded and long-haired strong man sat silently by the bed and stared at the news on TV. A weak old man on the bed glanced at Tony, who was in high spirits in the news, and finally looked at the lonely back of his son beside the bed with difficulty. He shed tears of regret, stretched out his hand tremblingly with all his strength. Ivan, this should have been yours, this should have been left to you by me. Ivan Vanko was silent about this, just holding his father's hand silently to comfort him. This should have been yours. Stark took it all away. I'm sorry, Ivan. The old man stared at Tony, who was the center of attention on the TV, and kept muttering and slowly closed his eyes. Until his death, he had Stark in his eyes. Ah! Feeling the old man's stopped pulse in his hand, Ivan Vanko lowered his head and roared in pain. Turbid tears passed through the corners of his eyes, and the moment he looked up, his eyes were full of hatred. Tony Stark, I will make you pay the price and destroy your entire Stark family. The angry voice echoed throughout the room, and a demon full of hatred was born. Triskelion building. Alexander Pierce looked at the reactor on the chest of Tony's armor in the news thoughtfully. A masterpiece beyond this era, a genius like Howard back then. He couldn't help but think of a young scientist who was as high-spirited as Tony now. The former rival of Hydra, Howard Stark. He also remembered the Howard relics stored in S.H.I.E.L.D. and studied countless times. An idea suddenly popped up in his mind. Maybe he could use this thing to befriend Arno. Anyway, S.H.I.E.L.D. has been studying for so long and hasn't found anything. Why not return it to Arno Stark to befriend him? The more Pierce thought about it, the more feasible it seemed. As for whether handing Howard's relics to Arno would strengthen the power of the Stark family, he said it didn't matter. Arnold alone was so powerful that they despaired, so how much stronger could the Stark family be? After all, Howard was immortal. No matter how smart he was, the power he created could not be comparable to that of a god. Pierce's thoughts flashed through his mind, and he had already made a decision in his heart. He pressed a number. Rumlow, take item number 91, we're going to Stark Manor. In a huge laboratory, General Ross clenched his fists as he looked at the steel ceiling with a big hole in it. Bruce Banner, Hulk is mine, mine. General Ross was determined to get this accidentally created monster. But the monster's tyrannical power made him somewhat helpless. Suddenly he thought of something and took out his mobile phone to open a news. The mobile phone was full of video news about Tony Stark being Iron Man. If this set of war weapons is in the hands of the military, it will not only greatly enhance the military's strength, but it may not be impossible to capture Hulk. General Ross looked at the steel armor in the video with greedy eyes. The world attracted countless eyes because Tony announced that he was Iron Man. There was excitement, hatred, calculation, greed, and indifference in these eyes. But none of this affects the tranquility of the manor. The warm sunlight shines on the white bed, as if the sun particularly loves this manor, so that every corner of the manor is always filled with warm light. On the bed, Arno hugs Wanda, who is wrapped tightly in the quilt and blushing. He is naked like a sculpture, watching the news on TV that has made the world boil. Iron Man. A smile flashed in Arno's eyes. Has the so-called sacred timeline of the Marvel world begun? Although he didn't see and understand all Marvel movies in his previous life. But he also knows that from now on, the world will be full of disasters. Superpower villains emerge endlessly. Superheroes are everywhere. From the vast universe to the dark alleys. They are full of super criminals and heroes. There is even a purple sweet potato that will randomly wipe out half of the population in the universe. Interesting. Arno did not feel any fear about the population reduction plan of the family planning director. There was even a hint of expectation in his eyes. Of course, it was not his expectation for his plan, but for the purple potato. It must be very strong to be able to kill half of the population in the universe. I really hope he can take a few more punches from me. After all, being invincible for a long time is also quite boring. He was a little impatient to find that sweet potato and have a good talk with him, physically. Brother Arno, can you go out first? I want to get dressed. Wanda in the quilt stared at Arno with her big watery eyes and interrupted his wild thoughts. Arno looked at Wanda, who only had her head exposed, with amusement. We have done what we should and shouldn't see, what we should and shouldn't do, is there any need to be so shy? Stop talking, get out, get out. It would have been fine if she hadn't said anything, but once she did, Wanda became even more embarrassed and buried her head in the quilt. Okay, I'll go out first, you get dressed and come down for breakfast. Seeing that Wanda was about to become a steam girl, Arno stopped teasing her, casually took a dark blue shirt and walked out of the room. The red-dressed maid, Kaya, came from the end of the corridor and bowed respectfully to Arno. Master, a man named Alexander Pierce has an appointment to visit. He claims to be the minister of the World Security Council and is a former colleague and friend of your father. As Kaya spoke, she gently reached out to help Arno button up his shirt. Howard's friend, I know, let him come at noon. Also, prepare some blood supplements for Wanda in the next few days. Arno smiled and touched the golden hair of the three-no girl, then walked downstairs. Kaya glanced at the closed door of Arno's room, a trace of loneliness flashed in her eyes, and then immediately returned to her usual expressionless expression, turned around and followed Arno's pace. She is the housekeeper of Stark Manor, Arno's housekeeper. She should not have any objection to Arno's decision, even if it is about feelings. The three-no girl followed Arno silently. Soon it was almost noon. A Maybach and a pickup truck stopped at the gate of the manor. Sitwell got out of the Maybach driver's seat and opened the back door. Pierce stepped out of the car and smiled at the huge manor in front of him. The military is really generous. Pierce said a sentence that was not sure whether it was admiration or ridicule. The tall iron gate of the manor slowly opened to both sides, and the red-dressed maid Kaya walked out. Behind her was a team of maids holding guns. Mr. Pierce, welcome to Stark Manor. I am the housekeeper of this manor, Kaya Soroya. Next, we need to conduct a routine inspection of the items you brought. Please understand. Facing the expressionless words of the maid, Pierce did not have the airs of a minister of the World Security Council, and said kindly, "No problem, Miss Soroya, this is your duty, it should be." Pierce stepped aside and made a gesture of invitation. Kia waved, and the maid behind her took out professional equipment and began to scan the vehicle and the items in the pickup truck. A few minutes later, the maid team returned and nodded to Kia. "I'm sorry for the offense. Please come this way. The master has prepared a sumptuous lunch for you." Although Kia's expressionless face showed no sincerity of apology, Pierce still did not show any dissatisfaction. After all, he knew very well that these maids could not be treated as ordinary servants. In this manner, they are the masters. There is no difference between offending them and offending Arno. Pierce took the lead in keeping up with Kia's pace. Crossbones carried a huge architectural model, and Sitwell also held a large box of information, and the two followed closely. Pierce did not ask too many people to follow. In fact, if there were not too many things to take, he might come alone. After all, the number of people here is meaningless, and it will make him look narrow-minded. Following Kaya to the restaurant, Arno was already sitting at the main seat, and on his left was a woman with reddish-brown hair. Pierce recognized her at a glance. This was the woman who almost caused the destruction of the entire Hydra. The target of Baron Stark's capture, the woman codenamed Scarlet Witch. Arno did not stand up, and pointed to the seat to the right of the main seat to Pierce. "Please sit down, Mr. Minister from the World Security Council." Pierce sat down with a calm expression and a friendly smile on his face. "Just call me Pierce, Arno, can I call you that?" "Please." Pierce smiled even brighter when he heard this, and he sat down and said, "You may not know me, but your father, Howard Stark, and I are actually friends for many years, and we are also comrades who fought together in the past." Pierce smiled nostalgically at the right time after he finished speaking, as if he missed the old days very much. Howard's comrade. Arno looked at Pierce with interest. He really didn't know that his cheap father who left behind billions of dollars had also joined the army. Perhaps you don't know that Howard is not only a great scientist and businessman, he also joined a secret organization. Arno raised his eyelids. "Oh, what secret organization?" "A global supernatural law enforcement organization. The full name is the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency." "This name is really long and ugly. Are you afraid that others will remember it?" "Haha, actually I think so too. I'll tell Fury later and ask him to consider changing it to a simpler name." "Well, let's talk about this organization." Arno and Pierce exchanged a few simple pleasantries and talked about business. Pierce said seriously, "You may have heard of this organization. It was founded during World War II to deal with the notorious Hydra at the time. And your father also joined at that time, or founded the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency with others. Captain America Steve Rogers, legendary agent Peggy Carter, and your father, genius scientist Howard Stark, are all its founders. Speaking of which, your father is not only my friend, but also my predecessor who led me at that time." After hearing this, Arno looked at him deeply. "Oh, aren't you the minister of the World Security Council? Have you also joined this bureau with a long and ugly name?" Pierce smiled slightly without changing his expression. "I was fortunate to serve as the director of the bureau, but I am old and unable to do it, so I retreated to the second line and became a minister. Arno nodded and said nothing more, looking at the two people who were standing at attention with models and cardboard boxes next to him. Don't be so nervous, put down your things, and sit down to eat together. Crossbones smiled politely at Arno, nodded, and gently leaned the model against the wall. Passing by the still stiff Sitwell, he kicked him without leaving a trace. Sitwell reacted, suppressed his pounding heart, put down the box, and sat down with Crossbones with a stiff expression. When he really faced Arno, Sitwell found that he was more nervous than he thought. In front of this god of the world, he was afraid that he would expose something if he was not careful, so the more he was afraid, the more nervous he became. Arno didn't care about this little bald man whose heart beat like a drum in his ears. He just thought he was nervous because he knew the power he had shown before. Kaya, serve the food. As Arno spoke, a steady stream of plates were brought in. Mostly Chinese food, the manner is used to it, please forgive me if the hospitality is not good enough. Arno said politely. Pierce didn't care at all and picked up the chopstick skillfully. In fact, I also like Chinese food with rich flavors. It seems that we are really compatible. During the meal, Pierce did not deliberately mention the matter of the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau. He just chatted with Arno about family matters. When he said goodbye, he handed Howard's relics to him and said goodbye. On the way back, the temporary driver Sitwell couldn't help but say, "Sir, can we just give him such an important thing today? Don't we take the opportunity to get closer to him? It may be very important to us, but for him, even if he cracks the secret, it is just a souvenir. Today is already a good start." Pierce sat in the back seat and closed his eyes and said leisurely, "It is worth it to be able to establish a relationship this time. Everything is difficult at the beginning. As long as there is a relationship, it will be much easier to contact later." Pierce's mouth corners slightly raised. For the first time in more than 10 years, he felt so relaxed. New York City, Manhattan, Central Avenue. Ah! A huge gray-green skeleton monster roared to the sky. A huge sound wave spread from around him, shattering countless glass. Hulk, get out. On the helicopter, General Ross looked as ugly as if he had eaten shit. It had been several months since Tony Stark announced that he was Iron Man. During this period, he had been applying to Congress to put pressure on Stark Industries to make Tony Stark hand over the technology of the Iron Man armor. But the group of mentally retarded congressmen above repeatedly rejected his proposals, and they would never agree to his application, and even refused to let Tony attend the hearing. They said that this would affect the establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States and the Stark family. Diplomatic relations, do they know the importance of the Iron Man armor to the war? As a result, General Ross has not even seen Tony, let alone the Iron Man armor. That's fine, after all, the matter of the Iron Man armor is not something he can say, and it's too important. But a few days ago, his people finally tracked down the whereabouts of Banner, who he had been thinking about. Today, he confidently laid a trap and waited for Banner to be included. In the end, the man was indeed caught, but his grandmother's Banner had been injected with serum and turned into an ordinary person. This really pissed off General Ross. What's the point of having an ordinary person? This wasn't over yet. Just when he was about to take Banner back and force him to continue studying the secrets of gamma rays to see if he could reproduce the Hulk miracle, a monster taller and more ferocious than the Hulk appeared. This monster was his right-hand man, Emil Bronsky. A monster that retained his original wisdom but was extremely violent. If Congress knew that the monster wreaking havoc here was his own man, he would be in big trouble. General Ross felt that this period of time was simply his Mercury retrograde, and everything was not going well. "Thaddeus, you must let me stop this monster. He was born because of me, and I must end it." Banner resolutely asked General Ross despite Betty's obstruction. "The Hulk has disappeared, and you are now an ordinary person. What can you do?" General Ross didn't really want Banner to take risks, not because he was worried about his safety. But Hulk was created by Banner. Without him, his super army plan would no longer be possible. Then watch this monster killing people in the city. I believe you also understand that the more he destroys, the greater the impact on you. I also believe that Hulk has not completely disappeared. I must take a gamble. Banner argued. General Ross's eyes struggled, just when he was about to give in. Hot DJ. A burst of hot music came from the helicopter with a frivolous and dissolute voice. Hey, General Ross, do you miss me? I heard that you have been paying attention to me in your dreams recently. Swish, 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 boom, boom, boom. The missiles arrived before the people. The 3 missiles blocked the monster's escape routes on the left and right sides in a triangle, bombarded the monster, and burst into violent flames. Tony, wearing a red and gold steel suit, flew to General Ross's helicopter. Hey, you created another monster. Why am I not surprised at all, our monster producer General Ross? General Ross's face was livid. Tony Stark, pay attention to your identity. You are just an arms dealer and have no right to ask about military affairs. Tony said disdainfully. Oh, really? Then why don't you solve this mess yourself? Without waiting for General Ross to reply, Tony suddenly kicked the helicopter out for a distance, and he also retreated a distance with the recoil. A huge rock flew in the moment Tony just kicked the helicopter away, flying between Tony and the helicopter. 1 second later, the helicopter crashed like a prison. Oh, Ross, your eldest son seems to be very dissatisfied with you as a father. He has a very bad temper. It can be seen that he lacks love and beating. Tony clearly saw the monster hit by 3 missiles in the smoke and dust slowly stand up under the thermal vision of the armor. It seems that the missile did not cause much damage to him, and there were no obvious scars on his body. Okay, Ross, you should retreat. You will only get in the way in the next battle. After Tony finished speaking, the foot thruster increased its power and burst into a fierce flame, rushing into the smoke and dust. The huge thrust plus a spinning acceleration kicked the monster who had just stood up out for more than 10 meters. What a hard body. Tony felt the numbness in his legs, and couldn't help but greet General Ross's family again in his heart. The monster got up and didn't take Tony's attack seriously at all. Except for Hulk, he looked down on everyone equally. Little bug, your tickling is useless to me, I hate it. With the roar of the abomination, the ground was suddenly covered with flying sand and rocks, and countless wind and waves were raised. Whoosh, boom, a small missile accurately shot into the roaring mouth of the abomination and exploded. Sorry, your mouth is too stinky, I can't help but give you a breath of fresh air. The abomination spit out a mouthful of bloody black smoke, and his eyes became angry. Now he really began to hate Tony. He kicked the ground with both legs, and the ground cracked instantly. Bang! With a loud bang, the abomination was so fast that only a shadow could be seen, and it appeared in front of Tony in an instant. Little bug, go to hell. The abomination's huge palm grabbed the unprepared Tony and threw him to the ground. Boom! With a loud bang, Tony was deeply smashed into the ground. For a moment, he felt that the wound on his chest that had just healed was about to split open again. But before he could catch his breath, a black shadow fell from the sky and crashed towards him fiercely. Boom! The ground was smashed into pieces by the black shadow. But fortunately, Tony's thrusters on both hands and legs instantly turned on the maximum horsepower, and he knocked on the ground several times like skipping stones to avoid the falling blow. Shit, I must make a set of armor specifically for dealing with this kind of power monster when I go back. Tony relied on the flexibility of the Mark armor to dodge the attack of the abomination while thinking about the plan of the exclusive armor. Fortunately, although the abomination's linear acceleration is very fast, its flexibility is more than 1 level worse than that of the Mark armor. No, Tony Stark is no match for the abomination at all. Only the Hulk can defeat him. Banner couldn't wait for General Ross to dawdle. He ignored the handcuffs on his hands and kissed Betty on the face. I love you, Betty. Before General Ross was about to die, he opened the hatch and jumped down from the sky. The wind whistled in his ears, the ground was getting closer and closer, his heart beat violently, and a glimmer of green appeared in his eyes. Finally, he fell to the ground and died. Of course, this is impossible. A big green hand stretched out. Hulk, here we go. Roar. The huge roar made the abomination stop hitting the mosquito. A 360-degree Thomas spin knocked Tony, who had been disturbing him around, away. He looked at the Hulk who was rushing towards him with excitement. This was his mortal enemy, the only person he could regard as an opponent. He also ran, running towards the Hulk in both directions. The vehicles or buildings that blocked the road along the way were smashed to pieces by the two of them. My God, I really didn't expect that he could do such a difficult move with his body size. Tony stood up, holding his waist that was kicked by the Abomination Thomas's spin, and looked helplessly at the two monsters rushing at each other. I have protected for so long, but I am not as bad as you two monsters who have been smashed along the way. But Tony knew immediately that he was too worried, and the big thing was still behind. In the roar, the two monsters collided with each other with all their strength. The world was silent, and then the violent power suddenly descended. Boom! A huge storm erupted between the two monsters, and countless vehicles were swept away by the huge shock wave and fell into the crowd who were still watching the excitement in the distance. Tony was so scared when he saw this scene that he used all his thrusters. He blasted two cars flying towards the crowd with his palms, and knocked another car away. But there were more than 3 cars flying from all directions. Although it was impossible for every car to fly towards the crowd. But in addition to the 3 cars that Tony stopped, there were still a few cars that flew towards the terrified crowd around. It was too late for Tony to intercept them. As Tony's eyes were bloodshot, the car suddenly turned red. But this red was not the splash of blood, but a group of deep red energy that stopped the car in midair. Then a silver shadow quickly shuttled around, and soon all the people around were transferred to a safe area farther away. A silver streak flashed by, and Pietro instantly appeared in front of Tony and teased. "What's wrong, old man? You're not very agile. Do you need me to help you?" Tony recognized Pietro, and it was because of this young man and his sister that he decided to destroy all the Stark weapons in the hands of terrorists. Tony's eyes were a little guilty. "Boy, I'm sorry about your parents." Pietro was stunned for a moment, and smiled with relief. "It's not easy to make you, who is so proud, say sorry. Let's reconcile." He reached out to Tony, who was sitting on the ground. Tony breathed a sigh of relief and shook Pietro's hand. Then, he shook nothing. "You're so old, you should get up by yourself." Pietro crossed his arms and looked at Tony, who was frozen with the same smirk as Arno. Finally it was his turn to see others get frustrated on this. Wanda on the other side put down the car and stared at Tony for a long time. Finally, the power of chaos emerged in his hand and flew to a 5-story building. Arno stood on the roof with his hands behind his back, watching the two monsters fighting fiercely with interest. The strength is good, the speed is not so fast, and the flexibility is very poor. Arno gave an evaluation in his heart. "Do you need my help?" Wanda looked at the two monsters fighting to the death. Her face was a little pale, but she still plucked up the courage to ask. "No, your current awakening level is still a little different from this kind of monster. Your body is too weak, and the same is true for Pietro. You, Pietro and Tony, go to evacuate the people around, and the scope of the impact may be larger later. Let them evacuate to a farther place, but if they really don't want to leave, don't worry about it." There was not much compassion in Arno's eyes. He was more interested in the two monsters in front of him than saving people. If Wanda hadn't seen the scene of the monsters' destruction on the news and wanted to save people, he wouldn't even pay attention to this place. After all, New York City is safe and happy every day. There will be no day when there is less crime in this city. He doesn't have so much free time to save people every day. However, Hulk and Abomination are indeed unexpected surprises, which makes him feel that this trip is worthwhile. These two monsters may allow him to stretch his muscles this time. Wanda worriedly advised, "You have to be careful too. If you can't beat them, run away. You can fly and they can't hit you." "I know, go ahead." Arno touched Wanda's head and smiled indifferently. "Can't beat them. It's impossible. I'm the strongest." After Wanda flew down, Arno didn't watch and slowly rose into the air. Little Green seemed to be in trouble and was beaten by Old Gray. This is indeed the case. Hulk, who was injected with serum, has completely fallen into a disadvantage at this moment. The more he fought, the more tired he became. It seems that the serum, although the Hulk factor in Dr. Banner's body was not completely eliminated, it still had a certain suppressive effect. "Hulk, you have become weaker. Are you not angry enough?" The Abomination stepped on Hulk so that he could not get up, but he was not satisfied. He wanted a Hulk in his prime, not this bloody Hulk. He wanted to defeat Hulk in a dignified manner. The tyrannical eyeballs turned and stared at the helicopter where General Ross was unwilling to leave. Hulk, you have no power, then I will give you some power. Is your girlfriend on that helicopter? The Abomination grabbed Hulk's hair and faced the helicopter, pulling out a street lamp from the side. I want you to watch your favorite person die in front of you. Be angry, Hulk. No, Hulk roared angrily, but how could he, who was weak, break free from the full-blown Abomination? The Abomination felt the Hulk gradually increasing his power in his hands, and the corners of his mouth rose. That's it, keep being angry. Abomination yelled, holding Hulk in one hand and throwing the street lamp like a javelin with the other hand. Whoosh! The street lamp made a sharp explosion, and a white air wave flew towards the helicopter. The speed was so fast that the helicopter could not avoid it at all. General Ross and Betty could only look at the flying street lamp in despair. No! With a huge roar, Hulk burst out with unparalleled power, and instantly lifted Abomination away. But it was obviously too late to stop the street lamp from shooting at the helicopter. Hulk could only reach out to Betty, who was also desperate, in anger and despair. Hulk and Betty looked at each other, as if they were saying their final goodbyes. Until a black shadow blocked the two people's sticking sight. Boom! The street lamp hit the black combat uniform and instantly twisted and deformed, and fell powerlessly from the S logo on Arno's chest. General Ross and Betty looked at the human blocking the helicopter in shock. But, is this the level that humans can have? Suddenly General Ross's face changed, and he remembered a top-secret document recorded by the military that several military bases were destroyed by one person more than a decade ago. More than a decade ago, he had not yet become a general and had not experienced that incident personally. Later, when he was at a high enough level, he sneered at it. Until Hulk appeared, he did not think that there was a situation where personal power could override national power. Arno ignored the shocked Ross father and daughter, and his indifferent eyes ignited a little excitement. Next, are you two ready for the second game? Hulk stared blankly at the shadow blocking the helicopter. His big eyes were full of confusion. He scratched his head for no apparent reason, obviously not understanding what Arno meant. Arno sighed helplessly at Hulk's wise eyes, and turned speechlessly to Abomination, who was blown away by Hulk. Are you not as mentally retarded as him? Fortunately, although Abomination was full of violent emotions, he still had his IQ as a whole. Controlled by Bronski's personality, he did not have an extra personality like Hulk. Little bug, you want to be a hero, but you chose the wrong target. I am Abomination. Although Arno easily blocked his attack, Abomination obviously did not take him seriously. Just a little bug, he could tear countless of them apart at will now. Go to hell. With footsteps like thunder, Abomination ran towards Arno with a roar, and jumped up when he got close. The huge claws were bound to tear apart the little bug that dared to provoke him, and by the way, tear apart the helicopter to complete his plan to provoke Hulk. Facing the majestic flying Abomination, Arno was not panicked at all and even wanted to laugh. Facing a flying opponent, it is undoubtedly stupid to jump into the sky and fight in the opponent's home court. This is simply a living target. Just like the Abomination now. Arno just turned around and dodged his attack. The Abomination couldn't turn in the air at all, and could only pounce on the helicopter. Before the claws of the Abomination were about to touch the helicopter, his huge body stopped in midair. Arno grabbed the right foot of the Abomination and grinned. The muscles in his right hand bulged, and he threw the Abomination to a higher altitude. Then he turned into a black light and rushed towards the Abomination in the sky. There must be a combo after floating in the air. Whoosh! The Abomination was thrown into the air with nowhere to gain leverage, and he couldn't control himself at all. He could only watch Arno approaching quickly. In a hurry, his claws flew wildly to form an impenetrable defense wall. Although the speed of the Abomination's claws was already extremely fast in the eyes of ordinary people, it seemed to be slowed down countless times in Arno's eyes, and his whole body was full of flaws. The Abomination only felt a pain in his stomach, and then his whole body began to hurt. Boom, 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 boom. Arno was so fast that it seemed as if he had split into two of himself, knocking the Abomination back and forth in the air. Finally, Arno, who had played badminton in the air, slammed the Abomination into the ground with a downward strike. Boom! With a huge roar, the ground within 100 meters of the Abomination was shattered. And the Abomination himself was smashed deeply into the ground, lying in a deep pit with a dull look in his eyes, looking at Arno in the sky with doubts about his life. What happened? Where am I? Who am I? Before he could finish being confused, the black spots in his eyes gradually enlarged. The Abomination widened his eyes and rolled out of the deep pit. The next moment, it was like a meteor hitting the ground. Boom! The deep pit that was already smashed by the Abomination was directly spread by this huge force. A huge shock wave erupted from the point where Arno landed, and the Abomination that had just climbed out of the deep pit was blown away. From a distance, this area of several hundred meters in radius was like an inverted bowl. The surrounding buildings were even more shattered and broken into pieces. Congratulations to the residents around who just bought installment houses, and now they don't have to pay installments. In the smoke and dust, Arno slowly rose from the deep pit and flew back to the ground, with a red light in his eyes subconsciously. But then Arno thought of something, and the red light in his eyes went out. Such a durable toy can't be broken so quickly. The Abomination on the ground climbed up in shock, and even the brutality in his eyes disappeared. With this terrifying power, who is the monster? The huge gap made him occupy the high ground in IQ again. Hulk, I recognize you. The big green fat man jumped to Arno and gave him a thumbs up. He liked this human who beat up the fake who just beat him up. You are so good, I am embarrassed to hit you. Hulk looked at Arno in a daze, still not quite understanding what Arno said. Hit me? Why hit me? Aren't you my friend who beat the fake with me? Until the next second, a fist quickly enlarged in Hulk's eyes. Bang! Hulk fell heavily beside the Abomination, shook his big head that was beaten with stars, and looked at the equally confused Abomination. Arno looked at them as if they were two ants, too weak, come at me together, and please me together. Looking at Arno's contemptuous eyes, and suddenly remembered the feeling of powerlessness he once had in front of Hulk. Asshole, I'm the strongest. That feeling of powerlessness like a mortal facing a god. That was the most unacceptable failure in his heart. Isn't that why he turned himself into a monster in exchange for absolute power? How can I lose again? I won't lose again. The veins on the muscles of the Abomination bulged, and his legs sank into the ground with force, and he crouched slightly and was ready to go. Then he threw the cute Hulk next to him at Arno without warning. The green fat man flew towards Arno like an anti-aircraft gun. Arno just waved his hand and slapped the flying Hulk away like a mosquito. But the next moment, a fist bigger than Arno's head appeared from behind Hulk at the moment Hulk was knocked away, and hit Arno in the face. Got it. The Abomination was excited. But is it really so? Dang. A sound like hitting a piece of steel came. Abomination's eyes widened with fear as he sweated coldly. He punched the opponent in the face with a fist that was powerful enough to smash a building, but he didn't move at all. Arno held Abomination's wrist, easily took the fist away from his face, and smiled, not bad, much smarter than Hulk. As if dissatisfied with Arno's evaluation. Hulk. An angry roar came, and the two couldn't help but look sideways. It turned out that Hulk, who was beaten by the two, finally completely lost his little reason. Arno was beaten before he came, and he was beaten again after he came, and it was a mixed doubles. Hulk also has a temper, not everyone can control him. If Hulk doesn't show his power, do you think I'm Banner? Under Hulk's green skin, blood vessels flow like a python, his body has expanded a whole circle, and his eyes are full of bloodshot. He looks like he is going crazy. Abomination looked at Hulk in this form with excitement. This was the Hulk he wanted, the inner demon he wanted to defeat. Arno also became interested in Hulk in this state. In terms of momentum alone, Hulk was already better than Abomination. Abomination couldn't wait to break free from Arno's restraints and challenge Hulk. But how could Arno let him snatch his prey? Crack! He directly twisted Abomination's arm with his backhand. Ah! At the moment when Abomination screamed and bent over, he elbowed him in the temple. When Abomination was dizzy, he pressed his head hard into the ground. Then, without waiting for him to pull it out, he stomped hard on the back of Abomination's head. Boom! With a loud bang, Abomination slid straight up. Abomination, already logged out. The crowd on the rooftop in the distance had been evacuated, and Tony, who was watching the fight, couldn't help but smack his lips. Tisk tisk tisk, they were really ruthless, all the moves were illegal. It was really too dark. Pietro and Wanda nodded in agreement. Deadpool stood side by side with the three on the rooftop and sighed. That's right, this dark style is like it came from DC next door. Tony and the other two nodded, then got shocked and turned to look at Deadpool. When the hell did you come? Deadpool spread his hands. Please, have you forgotten that I am your personal bodyguard, and I will be wherever you are? Tony pointed at his own armor, and then pointed at the low-quality tights on Deadpool and said speechlessly. Do you think I need protection? And are you sure that this thing can protect me? Then I don't care. Master Arnold said that your flesh under this steel suit is still extremely fragile. He gave me a basic salary of 10 million a year and asked me to protect you closely. Close, oh. Deadpool deliberately emphasized the word, close, and made a heart shape to Tony with his butt sticking out. Tony felt nauseous and looked at his red armor, and then at Deadpool's red tights. For the first time, he thought whether he should change the color of his Mark series. This pervert has defiled this color, and he feels like vomiting when he sees it. Then don't follow me, go back to the manor, I will still give you 10 million every year. Deadpool said slowly. No, Arno also said that he will give me an extra 10 million for every fatal injury he blocked for you. And if I dare to go back, he will let me experience the feeling of flying head again. Tony finally couldn't help it after hearing this, and said to Deadpool. Deadpool was not to be outdone. Oh thank you, how can you curse so badly, Wanda and Pietro on the side covered their faces and said that they were ashamed to look at these two people with worrying qualities. Boom, until a dull loud noise came, it interrupted the magic bombardment between Tony and Deadpool. Whoosh. Then a huge wave of wind and waves swept towards them. Crack, crack, crack. Tony reacted quickly, and the side armor of his legs immediately unfolded the support, and his legs were firmly fixed on the ground. And Tony pulled Pietro and Wanda tightly to prevent them from being blown away by the wind and waves. But Deadpool was not so lucky. Tony only had two hands and could not pull up a third person. And even if he could pull, Tony might not pull this fool who disgusted him. Ah! With a long scream from Deadpool, he gradually went away with the wind. Tony and the other two did not even look at the flying Deadpool. Instead, they stared closely at the two people who caused the storm in the battlefield ahead. Or one person and one monster. I saw Arno and Hulk holding their hands together, wrestling constantly. The ground around their feet began to crack inch by inch because of the force of both sides, and it was still sinking. It was as if the earth could not bear their extreme power that did not belong to the human world. And the powerful storm just now was only caused by the collision of their power. Yes, it's much more powerful than the Abomination, but it's not enough. Arno, who is 1.95 meters tall, is undoubtedly a small man in front of the Hulk who is more than 3 meters tall. But body size has never been the decisive factor of strength in the supernatural world. Arno left the ground and slowly surpassed Hulk's height, looking down at Hulk. Hulk obviously didn't like the feeling of being looked down upon by a small man, and kept trying to pull Arno down with both hands. But even if he used all his strength, Arno remained motionless in midair. Seeing that Hulk's green face was flushed with strength, Arno couldn't help but feel a little soft-hearted. Just let him pull it down for the sake of this kid's hard work. Do it as you think. Arno was pulled over by the force of Hulk's downward pull. But before Hulk was happy, Arno suddenly raised his head and headbutted Hulk's big head. Boom! With a muffled sound, Hulk fell to the ground, with a big bump on his forehead. But the extreme anger did not make him faint, but made him stronger. Roar! With the big bump on his forehead, Hulk stretched out his huge palm angrily, grabbed Arno in the air and threw him to the ground. Then he raised his fists to the fallen Arno and started to punch him left and right crazily, performing the Hulk version of military boxing. Where you fall, lie there for a while. Arno lay on the ground, raised his hands and leisurely blocked every punch from Hulk. The strength is okay, just right for massaging yourself. But there are too many flaws, just like a child's random punching. There is no technical content at all, the main point is a miracle with great force. There is some disappointment in Arno's eyes, it seems that Abomination and Hulk can't let him fight well. Not only is the strength not enough for him, but even the IQ is not good enough. In this case, Then, let's end it. Two hands suddenly grabbed accurately. Hulk's fists were blocked. Then Hulk immediately felt a piercing pain in his wrist. Arno slowly rose into the air, twisted Hulk's wrist and made him kneel on one knee involuntarily. He looked at the kneeling Hulk indifferently, just like a king looking at his subjects who surrendered to him. Although Hulk was stupid, he was not smart either. But he had a strong self-esteem. He ignored the pain in his wrist and stood up with a twisted face despite the risk of breaking his wrist. Hulk's painful and twisted but still stubborn appearance made Arno feel a little bit sorry. He was just a child who looked a little mentally retarded. He just wanted to stand up. What was wrong with him? With this guilty mentality, Arno decided to kindly help Hulk eliminate the pain. Good night, Hulk. After saying good night, Arno punched Hulk's head hard, intending to let Hulk try his own hypnosis method that worked all the time. But unexpectedly, Hulk opened his mouth and roared at this time. Roar, bang, crack, three completely different sounds were heard. Looking at Hulk, who fell into a baby-like sleep but had broken teeth all over the floor, Arno fell into deep thought. Hulk was quite obedient. He really didn't want to break his neat teeth. Forget it, with Hulk's recovery ability, his teeth should grow back. Probably. Looking at Hulk, whose body gradually shrank back to the state of an ordinary person, Arno was a little uncertain. Thump thump thump. The sound of helicopter propellers came, and General Ross jumped off the helicopter. Many military armored vehicles drove around, and a large number of soldiers surrounded him. General Ross walked forward with his head held high, showing Arno his usual arrogant attitude towards arms dealers, and said in a commanding tone. Arno Stark, thank you for helping the military subdue these two monsters. But their affairs are confidential. I must take these two monsters back and imprison them personally. Oh, and you, as the person involved, also need to go back with us to assist in the investigation. Without waiting for Arno to reply, he waved his hand and asked people to take away Bronski and Banner, who had regained their human form. In his opinion, these arms dealers are just dogs raised by the military, and there is no reason for the owner to need the consent of the dog he raises to do things. Chapter 31. Facing the arrogant General Ross, Arno did not show any dissatisfaction. He ignored the soldiers who came forward, but slowly walked to General Ross and patted his shoulder, showing a sunny smile. As expected of a general, you have great authority and courage, not bad. Several soldiers who walked towards Banner and Bronski were cut in half by a red laser without any warning. General Ross was shocked when he saw this scene and wanted to retreat. But the hand on his shoulder seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, making him unable to move. He angrily questioned Arno with red eyes. What are you doing? You are making an enemy of the whole United States, do you know that? Oh, really? Then I really want it, but can you make an enemy of the whole United States? Arno looked at the incompetent and furious General Ross with disdain and sneered. The president did not dare to speak loudly in front of him, let alone General Ross, little, Lieutenant General. This attitude of not taking himself seriously completely angered General Ross. Asshole, do you really think no one can stop you? Don't forget that Stark Industries still needs to rely on the military to survive. General Ross took out the trump card that he thought could control these arms dealers. Unfortunately, he was targeting the wrong person, and other arms dealers might back off because of this. But Arno didn't care about it at all, and even couldn't help laughing. Poochie, stop it, Stark Industries needs to rely on the military. You have figured out each other's status, right? General Ross was extremely angry. You are challenging the authority of the military. Tear. Arno tore off General Ross's shoulder and right hand with one hand, violently interrupting him. Authority. Is your authority useful now? Understand, it is the military that needs Stark Industries. Not Stark that needs the military. Ah! General Ross fell to the ground with a muffled groan. The pain from his arm made him sweat coldly. His face turned pale instantly, but he still gritted his teeth and did not scream. Arno sneered and threw the severed hand in his hand to General Ross, leaned over and patted his old face. That's right, no one can cure me. Otherwise, you can try to create a few more monsters. These two are too weak. The smile on Arno's mouth was like a devil in Ross's eyes. Another hot line of sight. All the soldiers who wanted to rescue General Ross were torn apart by the red light. Arno lifted General Ross's head with his right hand and turned the bleeding General Ross to face the many soldiers. Come on, continue, come forward to save your commander. Arno's tone was not heavy, even a little gentle. But the red light in their eyes made everyone understand that if they went forward, the fate waiting for them would be the pile of minced meat in front. But after all, some of them were loyal soldiers who had followed General Ross for many years. They wanted to save their general more than die. They didn't dare to shoot General Ross next to Arno, so they quietly put their hands on the sabers and began to move. Arno saw all this and just watched with a smile. General Ross took a breath and stopped them from moving forward with his only remaining hand. He raised his head with difficulty, which was sweating from the pain, and ordered. Everyone, stay where you are. No one is allowed to move forward without my order. Arno shook his head regretfully. It's a pity. You have dampened the enthusiasm of the boys. General Ross gritted his teeth. What do you want to do? What do I want to do? Isn't it what you want to do? They are my spoils of war. Who gave you the courage to point fingers? You still want me to go back with you to cooperate with your investigation? I dare to go. Ask your superiors if they dare to accept me. Arno threw him to the ground. General Ross's eyes went black. The heavy blood loss and the fall almost made him die. I have taken these two monsters in, but after all, you are their biological father. You should pay for the losses they have caused. Arno slowly left the ground and issued a final blow of mental damage to General Ross, who was dying on the ground. General Ross spurted out a mouthful of blood, his hand sunk into the ground, his head lowered and he said nothing. Hey, swoosh. With a sneer, Arno disappeared with a sound of breaking through the air. Also disappeared were Banner and Bronski, who were unconscious on the ground. After Arno left, General Ross finally raised his eyes full of resentment and hatred. Arno Stark, I want you and everyone around you to die. Above the high clouds, Arno, who was about to leave, stopped. Standing in the clouds from the top of the cloud, he looked down at General Ross's hateful eyes, and his indifferent black pupils glowed red. Bang! A red light fell from the sky, and General Ross's head was instantly torn into pieces. Blood plasma and brain matter exploded on the faces of the soldiers who came forward to help him. I was going to let you go, and let you create some fun like the Hate Hulk for me in the future to make me happy. After all, this world is too boring at this stage, and we need to create some fun ourselves. Raising a tiger to cause trouble. It would be best if this tiger could crack the Storm Nebula. Otherwise, it would be too boring. But why do you have such a foul mouth? Really? Arno finally looked at General Ross's headless body indifferently and disappeared from the cloud. Let's go, there's nothing fun to watch, let's go home. A voice appeared behind them, and the three people who were still watching the scene of General Ross's body being carried away in the distance were startled. Tony and Pietro were the first to react and turned around. After all, they had seen Arnold's bloody methods, so although they were shocked that Arnold directly killed the military, they quickly came to their senses. But Wanda was different. It was the first time she saw the existence of the warm sunshine like a god in her heart, showing such a bloody other side. What's wrong? Are you scared? Arno casually threw Banner and Bronski on the ground, stepped forward and gently stroked Wanda's hair. Wanda shook her head, buried her face in his chest and said sullenly, No, no matter what you become, I and everyone in the manor will always stand by you. Arno hugged Wanda tightly, showing a warm smile from the heart. Don't worry, I have never changed. To you and everyone in the manor, I am still your ordinary family. Pietro looked at this scene with an aunt's smile. He was very pleased that Wanda found her own home. Especially this person as Arno's eldest brother. In the future, he will be Arno's eldest brother's brother-in-law. Should I change my name to Arno's brother-in-law? Pietro was a little bit dazed and fell into fantasy. Okay, what are you two doing here? Go home and lie in bed. Tony obviously didn't want to eat this dog food, interrupting Arno and Wanda who were affectionate, and Pietro who was in fantasy. By the way, I know Bruce Banner. He's a good scientist, but not suitable for your place. Give him to me and I'll make arrangements for him. Arno nodded and had no objection. After all, one pet is enough for the guardhouse. Oh, use it, but be careful not to let him transform at will. Although I can hold him down with one hand, he can also crush you with one hand. I'm not using it, Forget it, I'm too lazy to tell you, I know it. Tony was about to retort but replied absent-mindedly. Well, call me if you have anything, don't be stubborn. Okay, I know, I'm leaving first, Pepper is waiting for me to go home for dinner, bye you guys. Tony waved to Arno, grabbed Banner, and flew up to the sky anxiously. Although Tony took Banner away for obviously not as simple as not being suitable for the manor, there must be other reasons. But he didn't care so much, let Tony do whatever he wanted. It's just a Hulk, it's not a big deal. After all, he is his younger brother, just spoil him. On the other side, Tony didn't know that his little thoughts were not hidden at all. On the way back, he couldn't wait to start his new plan. Hey, Jarvis, help me create a new document and name it, Veronica. I want to build a big one. This Hulk hate incident made him realize more of the shortcomings of the Mark armor, especially in terms of absolute strength. His arrogant character does not allow him to always rely on his brother, although it is very cool. But wouldn't it be more fun to build a battle armor that can sweep everything? Tony, is never weaker than others. Tony is never weaker than others. Arno also lifted Bronski with one hand and held Wanda with the other hand and soared into the sky. Oh, no, leave me again. Pietro moved his legs helplessly and turned into a silver shadow and disappeared. Not long after they disappeared, a blood-red hand stretched out from the edge of the roof. Deadpool climbed up the platform with difficulty, and lay down panting. Okay, don't worry about me, guys. I just fell down more than 10 floors, and it's just a comminuted fracture. I'm totally fine. The rooftop was silent. A few crows flew by. Deadpool turned his head and looked at the empty rooftop, and complained helplessly. Did no one notice that a baby was missing? It must be said that Arnold is not only powerful. He is also a qualified dog trainer. In the past, Deadpool was conquered by his money power. Now Abomination bows down to his iron fist. Bronski, who woke up, has completely regained his sanity. He gladly accepted Arnold's invitation to him to guard the house. After all, it is clear that there is no place for him outside. Except for Arnold, he will have the same fate of fleeing as Banner in other places. Besides, the conditions offered by Arno are not bad, with an annual salary of 10 million, including food and accommodation. Although there are no holidays, there are no restrictions on freedom. Just report in advance if you want to go. And the job is simple, just literally, guarding the house. When there is nothing to do, you are idle, and when there is something to do, you go to work. It is considered a high-level community security guard. Of course, the most important reason for him to accept this job is that Arno's eyes glowed red when he said this to him. If he dared not agree, he would not be working here now, but in heaven. And even if there was no threat from Arno, he actually felt pretty good. After Arno's easy crushing, he realized that there are people beyond people and heaven beyond heaven, and he previously thought that the strongest Hulk was not invincible. Since Hulk was easily defeated by Arno, his obsession with defeating Hulk became meaningless. In simple terms, it is lying flat. Just like now, he has been working in the manor for several months. He has begun to enjoy this leisurely life. Every day, lying down at the door, drinking juice, and closing my eyes is another beautiful day. Bronski, look after the house, I'm going out for a while. I only heard his voice, but I didn't see him. Bronski was not surprised and made an okay gesture to the black shadow in the air. Time goes back to 10 minutes ago, 5 months have passed since the Hulk Abomination incident. Under the deliberate suppression of the military, the Hulk and Abomination incidents were not reported. And Arno is certainly unlikely to be reported. After all, Arno threatened the military and killed his own lieutenant general without any scruples. Once the military dared not to say anything, it would undoubtedly be a huge blow to the prestige of the military. As for General Ross, although he was killed by Arno, because there was no direct evidence to prove that Arno did it, the military did not attack Stark Industries. Even a person with eyes knows that the laser that fell from the sky came from Arno's eyes, but the military leaders pretended not to see it, and Ross the soldiers under the general had no way to redress the injustice for their general. And even if General Ross died, he could not escape the persecution of interests. After the trial of Congress, he was finally stripped of his title of general for threatening national security. What is outrageous is that for this inexplicable reason, 90% of the members of the parliament voted in favor. And at the same time, it was also ruled that he had to pay for all the losses caused by Hulk and Abomination, including Arnold's heroic actions. If there was not enough money, it would be deducted from the military expenses of his previous military department. As a result, his military department went bankrupt and was divided up by people from other military departments. In the end, even his body was buried with the treatment of ordinary people. None of the officers and congressmen who had been on good terms with him in the past attended his funeral. Sad. And the death of General Ross also caused Arnold to have nothing to do during this period. He would check whether there was anything big happening on Earth every now and then. It's just like readers looking at their favorite novels to see if the author has worked hard to update. It's just that you look at the author, and Arnold looks at the Earth. As for why he doesn't find other things to do, it's mainly because he's too strong to be interested in ordinary things. Although there have been a lot more superpower crimes on Earth since Tony announced that he was Iron Man. But most of them are inferior superpowers, and Arno doesn't even want to watch them. But Pietro seems to enjoy the feeling of being a hero since he was thanked by the civilians he saved in the last Abomination incident. Now he is often active in the streets of New York to fight criminals and help old ladies cross the road. Because of his extreme speed and the elegant silver figure when running, he has actually made some name for himself, and his fans have given him the heroic title of Quicksilver. In Pietro's proud words, it's fast as silver lightning. His sister Wanda has no interest in being a superhero. Except for occasionally helping others when she sees injustice, she doesn't deliberately look for criminals to fight. Except for going to school every day, she spends most of her time with Arno. As Arno's absorption of solar rays has passed the rapid growth period, the growth rate is similar when he is outside the Earth or inside the Earth, so he doesn't go outside the Earth to bask in the sun for a few months. Until 10 minutes ago, Arno had been bored for several months. Then a phone call aroused Arno's interest. It was a call from Alexander Pierce, the Minister of the World Security Council. In addition to the usual reminiscences, Pierce also gave him an unexpected invitation. A hammer that fell from the sky and could not be lifted no matter what. Pierce sincerely invited Arno to try. Arno readily agreed. He was bored and wanted to see how special this hammer was. In the blink of an eye, he arrived above the coordinates given by Pierce. A wasteland not far from a small town in New Mexico. Shield, temporary base. Whoosh. A sharp sound of breaking through the air was heard. The agents in the base were instantly alerted when they heard the sound. Is there a fighter jet flying nearby? Phil Coulson, the person in charge of this incident, frowned and walked quickly out of the base. Shield controls the air area in this area. If a fighter jet appears, there is only one possibility: enemy attack. The last second after walking out of the base, Coulson was still worried about whether it was an enemy attack. The next second, Coulson's hanging heart finally died completely. Bang! I saw a black shadow falling quickly from the sky, hitting not far from me and raising a piece of yellow sand. Then, a tall figure walked out of the yellow sand. Shield's Level 10 top secret file, code name, Superman. Everyone, stand down. Coulson reluctantly asked everyone to put down their weapons. Mr. Stark, what are you doing here? I heard that you have a hammer that can't be lifted, so I was invited to help. Arno said and waved to the tower in the distance. Long time no see, Clint. The man holding the bow in the tower also waved to Arno. Hi, Arno, you must go for a drink with me after I get off work. There is a great tavern in the nearby town. Arno gave him an okay gesture. Clint Barton, codenamed Hawkeye, is a level 7 combat agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. He is also a close friend of the former level 7 agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Black Widow, and Natasha Romanoff. In the years when Natasha worked for the Manor, Barton would visit her from time to time, so Arno and Barton have known each other for many years. Although Barton was a little unhappy with Arno forcing Natasha to work for him. But after arriving at the Manor, he found that Natasha was not only much happier than in S.H.I.E.L.D., but also had a salary that he could not even reach, so he fell silent. He even thought about going to work at Arno's Manor. Working for 2 years to achieve financial freedom directly, isn't it better than working illegally in S.H.I.E.L.D.? But in the end, after Nick Fury's face became even darker and he stared at him for a long time, he gave up. After all, Nick Fury still helped him a lot. For example, few people knew the information of his wife and daughter. Barton sighed and leaned on the railing of the tower like a salted fish. A good life is out of reach, so he can only continue to work illegally and make a living. As for his slacking work attitude, will he be discovered by Helu Dan? He said, "You try to manage Superman." When his extraordinary vision allowed him to find that it was Arno in the air, he put down the bow and arrow in his hand. Not only because he and Arno had known each other for a long time and were considered friends, but also because the multifunctional bow and arrow in his hand was no different from a toy in front of Arno, unless he had a kryptonite arrowhead. But Barton actually never believed that even if there was kryptonite in reality, it would really be useful to Superman. After all, if he was Superman, he would have 100 ways to prevent kryptonite from affecting him. Coulson waited for Arno and Barton to finish talking before smiling and saying, "Although I can't stop you, I still need to ask you who invited you to help." Coulson asked these questions in a gentle tone, and even made way for the gate of the base. This means that he is just asking a routine question, and you can go in even if you don't answer. Before Arno could answer, a bald man suddenly jumped out of the crowd. "Mr. Stark, welcome. I'm Sitwell. I'm sorry I'm late. Minister Pierce just told me you were coming. I didn't expect you to arrive so soon." Agent Sitwell, the second person in charge of this incident, ran over sweating and hurriedly explained to Arno, fearing that he would be dissatisfied. Arno smiled and patted his shoulder. "It's okay. I came in a hurry and caused misunderstandings. Relax. I still remember you. You were also very nervous when you came with Pierce last time. Look, his usual personality is still very sunny and gentle, and he is approachable. He is not as scary as some people say. Thank you for your understanding." Sitwell breathed a sigh of relief, and then explained to Coulson next to him, "Mr. Stark is the special assistant invited by Minister Pierce. He has the right to participate in the research and use of the ownerless hammer." "I understand. Mr. Stark, please come this way. I will take you to visit the base and the hammer." Coulson nodded, and without asking any more questions, he invited Arno into the base. Originally, he was just asking symbolically. Even if Arno came uninvited, he would have no way to deal with it. Since Minister Pierce invited if they were invited, there would be no problem. After all, strictly speaking, Pierce was even his boss's boss, and he, a small level 7 agent, had no right to ask. Arno nodded, put his hands behind his back, and walked into the temporary base surrounded by the crowd. There was nothing to see in the base, just a bunch of long tents built with steel frames. Finally, everyone came to the center of the base, a square open-air fence. The fence was very empty, with only one item: a hammer. Coulson called down the researchers who were doing tests around the hammer, took Arno to introduce him. "This is the hammer that cannot be moved. Its structure cannot be scanned, and its material does not belong to any material on the Earth. And all our means cannot remove even a little powder sample from it. It is indestructible." Arno tilted his head as he looked at the hammer, and a smile of interest appeared at the corner of his mouth. Interesting, he couldn't see through the internal structure of this hammer. And it was not because of the material problem like lead, but because there was something strange inside the hammer that blocked his sight. It was more like magic. And it was a magic that was much more powerful than Wanda's current power. Because Wanda's magic could not block his sight, everyone stepped back. Arno waved his hand. Without waiting for Coulson to reply, Sitwell on the side immediately ordered, "Everyone leave here and wait outside." The other guarding agents around looked at Coulson hesitantly. Although Sitwell was the second person in charge of the base, they had to listen to his orders. But Coulson, the first person in charge, was still here. If they listened to him, what would Coulson do if he wrote bad things about them in the action report later? Sir, should we let them all retreat? After all, if there are too many people and an accident happens, it is easy to cause unnecessary casualties. Courtwell also reacted and smiled awkwardly at Coulson. He was eager to perform in front of Arno for a while, and forgot that his boss was still there. Coulson narrowed his eyes slightly and glanced at him, and ordered, "Everyone, leave. No one is allowed to come in without my order." The surrounding agents retreated quickly as if they had been pardoned. Arno ignored the little farce of Coulson and Sitwell. He just thought that there might be an accident, and he kindly reminded them when he was in a good mood. It didn't matter whether they went out or not, he didn't care anyway. Arno walked in front of the hammer and looked at it. The hammer was silver gray, not big, but not small. It was too big to hit nails, but just right to hit people. There were complex patterns on the edge of the hammer, and the dark red handle was surrounded by silver textures. The overall look was simple and exquisite. Well, it was better than the stuff that cost 9 yuan and 90 fen from Pin Shishi. This was Arno's evaluation of the appearance of the hammer. In fact, he knew what it was when he saw it at first sight. The weapon of Thor, the god of thunder in the legendary realm, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. Well, although he hadn't seen the Thor movie in his previous life, he still knew about this Thor who looked like Mr. Shu Jinzhong. He casually hooked the strap at the end of the hammer handle with his fingers and lifted it. Sure enough, there was something, and it didn't move at all. Then I have to be serious. Arno held the hammer handle with his right hand, which felt good, and began to slowly apply force. Boom! There was a low rumble on the ground, and it began to shake violently. Everyone in the base was knocked to the ground by the sudden vibration. Even the town next door, which was more than 10 miles away, felt the vibration. In the horrified eyes of Coulson and others, countless cracks as thick as arms appeared on the ground under the hammer, and they were spreading rapidly around. Retreat! Retreat quickly! Coulson shouted, got up and turned around to run. In fact, he didn't need to shout. With such a big vibration, others had already started running. His grandma's base was about to collapse, how could he not run? 200 yuan a month, what's the point of playing with life? Get up for me, Arno shouted, and the veins on his right arm bulged, and he slowly pulled Thor's hammer up from the ground. Boom! The moment the hammer left the ground, dark clouds filled the sky, and countless thunders roared in it. Blue and white thunders kept falling from the dark clouds, like a calamity. It seems that the heavens are not happy with someone picking up the artifact that controls thunder in such a rude way. Coulson and other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents rolled and crawled out of the base, looking at the base covered by the blue and white thunder sea in a stunned look. Is this still our base? We have such a big base. Arno, bathing in the sea of thunder, ignored the violent thunder that fell on him. For him, he didn't care about this level of thunder. The damage caused. Don't joke. This feels not much different from his usual hot bath. Compared with this huge group of thunder, he is more interested in the hammer in his hand. Arno's fiery eyes stared at Thor's hammer in his right hand, which he forcibly pulled up but still felt extremely heavy. This hammer is really interesting. Not only is the hammer itself heavy, but there is also a special force that constantly tries to get Thor's hammer out of his palm and back to the ground. It seems that the hammer itself does not approve of the way he picked it up. But I like your stubbornness. The more you resist, the more excited I am. His arms continued to exert force, and his muscles almost broke the black battle suit, but he steadily lifted Thor's hammer to his eyes. Arno grinned with excitement. Little hammer, you seem very unconvinced. It's useless to be unconvinced. How does it feel to be forcibly picked up? Provoked, Thor's hammer burst out with more violent lightning to break free from Arno's palm. And a 3-flower rune flashed and emerged on the hammer body, and a terrifying breath emanated from the rune. This breath made him a little frightened. The owner of the rune might not be weaker than he is now. Something, but you are always just a tool, not your master. Arno also put his other hand on the hammer handle, and the terrifying power burst out, and he raised Thor's hammer high with both hands. Crack! A shattering sound rang in Arno's ears, as if something on the hammer had broken. With this shattering sound, the Thor's hammer in Arno's hand became less heavy. Boom! A loud thunderclap. Then, a thick and huge thunder enveloped Arno's entire body. And this thunder did not flash away, but continued to fall on him like a waterfall. But this seemingly violent thunder did not cause any harm, but kept trying to get into his body and merge with him. Is this the power of Thor? Arno felt the information coming from his mind, raised his eyebrows, and then relaxed, letting the power of thunder merge into his body. In a small town not far from here, Thor suddenly turned his head and looked into the distance. What's wrong? Jane looked at the man who had just proudly introduced himself to her as the god of thunder with confusion. Mjolnir. It's the breath of Mjolnir. Thor looked in one direction excitedly. But the next second, his smile froze on his face. The direction he was looking at was instantly covered with dark clouds, and thunder kept falling. This was not the main point. The most important thing was that a thick thunder fell, and a figure holding a hammer appeared in the middle of the thunder. Why is this scene so familiar? Isn't it the scene when he received the inheritance before? No, no, no. How could it be? Who took my Mjolnir? Thor ran madly in the direction of the thunder. Although Jane didn't understand, the wonders in the distance made her drive up with Dr. Eric and her assistant Daisy, and took Thor, who was running wildly with her. God's domain, Asgard. Odin, who was sleeping deep in the palace, suddenly opened his one eye. Odin slowly got up and looked towards the direction of the earth. It's the kid from Midgard who changed his fate. He has grown to this point so quickly. He sighed, and then felt helpless. But this is the experience I prepared for Thor. You will hit Thor so hard that he will completely lose confidence. He rubbed his temples in distress. Forget it, let the young people make trouble on their own. I, an old man, will not intervene. Maybe this time Thor can let go of Mjolnir as soon as possible and become the real god of thunder. Odin thought for a moment, then smiled wickedly. But, kid from Midgard, the weapons of God are not so easy to get. Let's make it a little more difficult for you. Odin's one eye flashed with golden light. On the throne of the palace, Loki, holding Gungnir, did not notice that the artifact representing the king of the gods in his hand also flashed with golden light at the same time. It's done, sleep. Odin smiled with satisfaction, fell down and continued to fall into Odin's sleep. At this time, Loki on the throne also felt the awakening of Thor's power. His face was grim, and his hand clenched Gungnir. Did Thor take Mjolnir back so quickly? Odin said he deprived him of his power, but he was just pretending. The more Loki thought about it, the more dissatisfied he became. His gloomy face and eyes became even gloomier. Why is the throne Thor's? Mjolnir is also Thor's, and even the people of Asgard like Thor more. He is also a prince of Asgard and a descendant of Odin. Why can I only live under the glory of Thor and become his eternal foil? Why can't my father recognize me once? Boom. Loki angrily slammed Gungnir to the ground. A golden divine power penetrated the ground, and a light door in the treasure house slowly opened. Loki connected to the destroyer through Gungnir, and ordered in a trembling voice. Now, go and kill my stupid brother, and make sure he never comes back. Buzz. A heavy buzzing sounded. In the light gate of the treasure house, a tall silver-gray figure walked out with heavy steps. The guardian of the Asgard treasury, the destroyer. At this time, Thor on Earth was full of anxiety. He didn't know that his good brother in Asgard thought he had got Thor's hammer and wanted to kill him. Thor leaned half of his body out of the car window, staring at the figure in the thunder, and clenched his fists. Mjolnir, hold on, I'm coming. I will never let anyone else take you away. Thor's eyes at this moment were as firm as if he wanted to join the party. He, Thor, the god of thunder, must not let Mjolnir fall into the hands of others for the glory of the northern gods. He is the only officially certified authentic Thor. There was a bang in the sky. Rumble. Over the base, the dark clouds gradually dissipated. The thunder slowly shrank until the huge lightning column that enveloped Arno was extinguished. In midair, Arno opened his eyes, and blue and white lightning flashed in them. The originally calm temperament has a bit more violent feeling of thunder. The black combat suit on his body also changed greatly. Not only did he have many unknown fish-scale metal armors, but even the black cape turned red. The whole person changed from a modern combat suit style to an ancient European armor style. Arno felt the extra thunder power in his body and tossed the Thor's hammer in his hand in a boring way. Sure enough, it was nonsense to raise the hammer to obtain the inheritance of Thor. It only stored a part of the thunder power. For ordinary people, this power is very strong, and it may be used for a long time if it is used sparingly. But for him, it is too weak. It cannot be said that the inherited thunder power is non-existent, but it can only be said that it has no effect on him. At most, it makes the special effects look better when he fights, and every punch is full of thunder. Apart from being fancy, it is meaningless. The only thing that he likes is the hammer in his hand. The material is good, the weight is moderate, and it is not easy to damage. There are also miscellaneous functions such as flying, automatic master search, and long-range attack. But the hammer has good functions. But Arno is not used to fighting with a hammer. For him, his iron fist is the best weapon. As for those messy functions, they are useless to him. He does not need to rely on the hammer to fly, and the long-range attack is not as good as his thermal vision. In short, Arno can only evaluate this hammer and its inherent Thor's power inheritance in 2 words. Chicken ribs. It is useless to eat it, and it is not a pity to throw it away. After all, although this thing was forced to use Thor's hammer by himself to cross the seal above. But others can't do it. The weight of this hammer is not his boast. Except for him, no one on Earth can lift it with pure strength. Not to mention the seal above, the weight of the hammer itself is inestimable. At least there is no one on Earth who can lift it with pure strength, at least he knows that there is no one, not even Hulk. So even if it is given to other people, no one can use it. Unless there is something in the inheritance of the power of Thor, only those who are just and pure in heart can possess the power of Thor. Arno sneered at this. There may be many people who are just, but pure in heart. Is there anyone who can be completely pure in heart? Arno doesn't believe that such people exist anyway. Again, at least there should be no such people around him. Arno, are you okay? Whoosh. There was a shout at the foot, and looking down, it was Hawkeye Barton swinging an arrow with a hook rope from the tower. Barton wiped the cold sweat. If the tower was not built on the periphery, he would definitely not be Hawkeye now, but Roasted Eagle. It's okay, just like taking a hot bath. Arno landed in front of Barton from the air and said lightly. Ah, you are still so pretentious. Barton's mouth twitched. Any lightning strike could kill your eagle, and you are in the middle of a sea of lightning. In the end, you were struck by a lightning that was thicker than a person. Is this just a hot bath? Those who have no ability are called pretentious. I am called showing off in front of others. After hearing this, Patton felt that Arno was even more pretentious. And he couldn't refute his words, because it was the truth. Patton wisely chose to change the subject. So what is this thing? How could it be so noisy and destroy the entire base? Arno raised his hammer and said casually, it's nothing, just a weapon, Thor's hammer. Oh, just a weapon. What, Thor, are you kidding me? Patton nodded calmly at first, then reacted and his eyes widened. You said God. Is there really a God in this world? Patton looked at Arno in disbelief. Originally thought it's outrageous enough that Superman in the comics appears in reality, and now even the legendary God has appeared. Then won't Titans, gods and so on appear in the future? Arno patted Barton on the shoulder to comfort him. Don't be so surprised, Clint, God is just a creature with a higher level of life. For example, if I call myself a god on Earth, who dares to object? Although it is true, I still think Thor is not very reliable. It's impossible no matter how I think about it. Hawkeye just finished speaking when a roar came from outside. I am Thor, my hammer is inside, why don't you let me in? Hawkeye, no way, the slap in the face comes so quickly. Outside, Coulson looked at the agents who were easily knocked down by Thor, and felt his temples throbbing. First, Arno came unexpectedly and picked up the hammer that they couldn't move no matter what. Then countless thunderbolts turned their hard-built base into ruins. Now even a psychopath dares to cause trouble in their shield. Do you really think we have no temper? Sir, if you break into our base again, we will use taser on you. Coulson's tone was still gentle, but the agents behind him took out the stun guns and pointed them at Thor, who was still wearing a hospital gown. Thor shuddered and stopped going crazy. He recognized this thing. He was just deprived of his divine power by Odin and sent to Midgard, and was electrocuted by the woman next to Jane with this thing. As the god of thunder, being electrocuted by this little thing is really a shame. Thor's face flushed. Jane looked at Thor's stubborn look and felt a little distressed. Ignoring Dr. Eric's obstruction, he said, well, how about you let us in here? Are you sure this is not a ruin, but a base? Looking at Coulson's cold eyes, Jane realized that she had said the wrong thing and apologized quickly. Sorry, but can you let us into the base to take a look? Maybe his hammer really fell in there. Coulson refused expressionlessly. No, please go back. Thor couldn't help it anymore and was ready to rush in by force. The thunder inside had dissipated, and maybe Mjolnir had been taken away. I am Thor, the god of thunder. I've had enough of you mortals. Bang! But just as he took a step forward, a hammer fell from the sky at his feet, almost hitting his feet. But at this moment, Thor didn't care about his feet that were almost smashed, but stared at the hammer at his feet with excitement. He could not wait to grab the hammer, but a flash of lightning appeared, and Thor let go in pain. He looked up and saw Arno, who was wearing Thor's armor and walked out of the ruins, side by side with Barton. You despicable mortal, you stole my Mjolnir. Thor was furious when he saw the Thor's armor on Arno. What's the difference between this and the previous crime? He lost his mind and rushed towards Arno with his fist raised. Bang! Then, he flew backwards at a faster speed than when he rushed and fell next to Thor's hammer. Arno retracted his waving hand and put it behind his back. Is this really Thor? With this physical fitness, he was afraid that he would be beaten to death if he used too much force. Are you Thor, the god of thunder? Then pick up your hammer and show it to me. After Arno said this, he directly cut off the connection with Thor's power, and the ancient European armor on his body turned back into a black battle suit. Compared to the inheritance of Thor, he wanted to see what the real Thor would look like when he picked up the hammer. Beside the hammer, Thor was delighted. This mortal who inherited the power of Thor actually gave up Mjolnir on his own initiative. Could it be that he was afraid of my reputation as Thor? It must be like this. You are a sensible mortal. Wait until I take back Mjolnir and inherit the throne, and make you the Prince of Midgard. After Thor said this, he looked confidently at his partner who had accompanied him in the battlefield for countless years, and his heart was burning. Soon he could use his divine power and take back Mjolnir, and he would be the invincible Thor again. Thor, with a surging mood, held the handle of the hammer with one hand, as if holding the hand of an old friend. Lift it. Why can't I lift it? Try harder. What? Still can't lift it? Is my posture wrong? Thor's smile slowly disappeared. He stuck his butt out, held the hammer handle tightly with both hands, roared and pulled it up with all his strength. But unfortunately, after trying for a long time, Thor, whose veins were about to burst, still couldn't move the hammer at all. Thor was desperate. Roared to the sky, kneeling on the ground in despair. He accidentally saw the seal of Mjolnir flash by. It's so boring. I thought I could see Thor appear. Arno shook his head in disappointment. I thought it was the return of the real god, but it turned out to be a big shit. So he's not Thor, he's really a psychopath. After hearing this, Barton looked at Thor, who was wearing a hospital gown and howling at the sky, and smiled. He said, there is no god in this world. Isn't the only one who can be called the god of the world right next to him? No, he is indeed Thor, but Odin has deprived him of his divine power and can't lift the hammer. Arno glanced at Barton, whose smile was frozen, and ruthlessly dispelled his luck. He didn't lower his voice, and everyone around him heard it, and they all had incredible expressions. Of course, this is limited to the people of S.H.I.E.L.D. who know Arno's identity. And Jane and the other two looked at him as if he was a psychopath. I think he should go to the hospital with Thor as a patient. It's boring. Let's go, Clint. Let's have a couple of glasses of the good wine you mentioned. Arno shook his head in boredom. If Thor couldn't lift the hammer, what was the point? Didn't he come here to see how strong the real Thor was? Now Thor was impotent. It seemed that he would not be able to see the majesty of Thor for the time being. He turned around and was about to have a couple of glasses with Barton, and come back when Thor was cured of his impotence. As soon as he turned around, he suddenly looked up into the sky. Under Arno's supervision, he saw a colorful light from outside the earth falling towards their position at a high speed. Boom! There was a loud bang in the sky, and a colorful beam of light appeared brilliantly. God's domain, Asgard, Star Destroyer plus teleportation weapon, Rainbow Bridge. The Rainbow Bridge fell beside Thor, who was kneeling beside the hammer in a daze. Buzz! In a buzzing sound, 4 figures wearing ancient European armor walked out of the colorful light of the Rainbow Bridge. It was the 4 fools of Asgard. The elegant blonde swordsman, Fandral. The black-haired yellow warrior, Hogun. The rough fat man carrying a big axe, Volstagg. The heroic female warrior, Sif. Everyone around except Arno was stunned. Especially Hawkeye. He felt like he was slapped in the face today. Are they also gods? Barton asked Arno with a twitch in his mouth. Congratulations, you got it right, but there is no reward. Arno looked at the four people with interest. However, is this the god in Norse mythology? Why does it seem so bad? The physical strength is much higher than that of normal people, but it seems to be several times stronger than normal people. At this level, even Hulk can beat the four of them with one hand. If the so-called gods are all as strong as them, it would be too disappointing. The four idiots of Asgard didn't know that someone was slandering them in their hearts. They didn't care about the stunned people around them and surrounded Thor. Thor, we need you. What's wrong with you? Wake up. Sif shook Thor, who was kneeling on the ground, anxiously. But Thor didn't move, as if he had lost his soul. Sif, get out of the way. I'll do it. The situation was urgent. Volstagg, who had a bad temper, was not as gentle as Sif. He pulled her away and slapped her directly. Snap. Sure enough, this trick is always the most effective way to refresh the mind. Thor covered his face and came back to his senses, staring at Volstagg blankly. You hit me. Volstagg dodged and glanced at the whistle on the side. No, you had a nightmare, I just got here. Really? But why does my face hurt so much? Thor touched his swollen face in disbelief. Sif kicked away the nonsense. Volstagg grabbed Thor's shoulders and lifted him up, saying anxiously. Thor, no time for idle chat, listen to me, the situation is urgent now. Odin has fallen into a deep sleep, and now Asgard is temporarily controlled by Loki. But he is not satisfied with this, he knows that you have taken back Thor's hammer. So he plans to send the destroyer to kill you, and if you die, he can inherit the throne forever. Thor was held in the air by Sif and caught the key words, his face full of disbelief and excitement. Loki wants to kill me. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Although Loki likes to play pranks on me, such as stabbing me with a sword, letting snakes bite me, etc., he will never kill me. We are brothers. Hogun, who has always been calm, held down the excited Thor and spoke silently, confirming Sif's words. Thor, what Sif said is true. The four of us originally planned to ask Odin to forgive you, but Loki was on the throne. At that time, Loki was using Gungnir to give the destroyer the order to kill you, and we came to inform you as soon as I heard it. Heimdall deliberately let us down secretly, and this can't be hidden from Loki for long. Time is urgent, and the destroyer may arrive soon, so we must immediately return to Asgard through the Rainbow Bridge and let you regain the throne. Quote. Hogun's words completely crushed Thor's heart. That's good now. Not only is the power gone, but the hammer is gone. Even his brother is gone. He wants to kill himself. No, this is impossible. Thor sat on the ground in despair. He and Loki loved each other so much. How could this happen? Why? Fandar, who had been silent all the time, also spoke up. There is no time to grieve for you. You are Thor, the god of thunder. Cheer up. We must go back and regain the throne immediately. Quote. Thor did not cheer up after hearing this, but looked at the hammer on the ground beside him in a lost state and said, No, I have not recovered my divine power, my father still has not forgiven me, and Mjolnir has chosen someone else. I am not qualified to go back and fight for the throne. Now it was the turn of the four warriors of Asgard to be shocked. Sif was the first to come to her senses. She loved Thor more than the identity of Thor. At this moment, she couldn't help but feel distressed when she saw Thor's lost state, and was about to comfort him. Boom! Another rainbow bridge fell, and a louder landing sound was heard in the light column. Just by the sound of the landing, you can tell that there is a big guy inside. Sif and the other four changed their faces. Oh no, it's Loki, the destroyer is coming. Quote. Sure enough, a tall silver-gray metal monster stepped out of the newly opened rainbow bridge. Asgard, the destroyer is here. The destroyer looked at Thor and paused at Sif and the other four. I am the king. You betrayed your new king. Heimdall dared to let you go without permission. Loki's voice full of jealousy and anger came from the destroyer. It's like this again. Why did Thor get demoted to the mortal world, and there were still so many people helping him? Why does it seem like the whole of Asgard is revolving around him? Volstagg was outspoken and cursed directly. Loki, you have evil intentions. You actually want to kill your own brother to seize the throne. You are not worthy of being the king. I am not worthy. You fat man. Loki was almost fuming. In anger, the destroyer's head armor unfolded piece by piece, and a bright yellow beam shot out, directly knocking Volstagg away. It just happened to fly towards Arno, who was watching the show. Looking at the fat man flying towards him, the kind-hearted Arno, of course, dodged sideways. Boom! Volstagg smashed into the ruins behind Arno. Arno looked at the traces of the beam of light that was still warm in the air and licked his lips excitedly. This thing looks a bit similar to his own thermal vision, so which one is stronger? Arno's eyes lit up red, and he decided to put the truth into practice. I shouldn't care about your family affairs, but who let you affect me? Loki saw Arno with glowing red eyes, but he didn't take him seriously. Instead, he felt that his dignity was challenged. A mortal is a mortal. So what if his eyes glow? He is just a mortal with glowing eyes. Mortal, you are looking for death. Buzz. The bright yellow beam from the destroyer's head burst out again and shot straight into Arno, bound to blow this guy who dared to blaspheme the gods to ashes. But the scene that Loki expected the destroyer to easily blow this mortal into ashes did not appear. Two red beams that seemed much smaller than the destroyer's beams actually resisted the destroyer's attack. Loki, who was controlling the destroyer on the other side, was stunned. How could this be possible? The destroyer is the #1 individual weapon in Asgard. The divine light in his eyes destroyed the world, and even Thor might not be his opponent. How could a mere mortal resist it? Loki was shocked and puzzled. Loki knew why immediately. Boom! A muffled sound of metal colliding was heard. Loki felt that the vision of the destroyer he controlled was spinning. Arno used his heat vision to hit the destroyer's beam and punched it away, then looked at Barton. Clint, I'll deal with this guy. You go evacuate the people in the nearby town, don't hit the children later. I understand. Be careful, thank you. Barton nodded and thanked him, then turned around and left with Coulson and the S.H.I.E.L.D. people. Arno is not Superman, he has no responsibility to help civilians, this is the responsibility of S.H.I.E.L.D. In Barton's view, Arno reminded himself more as a friend, not that he really cares about the lives of those people. After all, Arno is not a kind person in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s record, but full of blood and cruelty. I owed Arno a favor, so it seemed that I really had to treat him to a good drink. Thinking of Arno's alcohol tolerance, Barton smiled bitterly. These months of work were in vain. As soon as Loki controlled the destroyer to pull its head out of the yellow sand, a fist enlarged in his field of vision. Boom! It felt like flying again. Loki, who couldn't fly, experienced Thor's usual flying perspective again. Although he didn't like it. Enough. How dare you, a mortal, treat a god like this? Loki's angry voice came from the destroyer after it landed. In response, Arno fell from the sky and punched the destroyer into the ground. Looking at the destroyer, which was deeply sunk into the ground but still intact, Arno was satisfied. It's really hard. This thing is a qualified sandbag. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Bright yellow beams of light kept shooting from the ground, and Loki tried to directly block Arno's evasion route. He succeeded, and succeeded in making Arno too lazy to hide. Hit! Loki watched one of the beams engulf Arno, and he was excited. This difficult mortal finally died. After all, he was a mortal and could not compete with God. The beam went out, and the destroyer didn't even look at Arno in the sky. In his opinion, being hit by the beam of destruction could only be a wisp of ash, and there was no other possibility. It stood up and jumped out of the deep pit, ready to continue to complete the main task of killing Thor. Mr. Sandbag, the game is not over yet. It's not good to leave early. A faint voice came from the sky, but the destroyer looked up suddenly. I saw Arno standing in the sky without any injury, and even his clothes were not torn. How could it be possible? That was a beam of destruction. It seems that you are ready for the second game. What? Before Loki could react, a big hand occupied his entire field of vision. Then there was the aerial perspective that he hated. This uncontrolled flying reminded him of the time when Thor often took him flying. Thor always said, "You're welcome," but never asked if he liked this feeling. He didn't like it, but it was useless. Arno's hand was like a clamp, firmly grasping the face of the destroyer and flew high into the sky. No matter how the destroyer fought back, he couldn't let go. Loki felt the force feedback from the destroyer was like the feeling of hitting the Uru god steel with his fist. In one word, it's hard. Even if he couldn't fully exert the power of the destroyer, the power that the destroyer carried should be able to destroy the world. The destroyer was made of Uru god steel and the power of the gods, but one day he would lose to a human in hardness. Could this world be any more outrageous? He grew up eating genetically modified corn. Arno didn't know Loki's shocked thoughts, but he felt that the destroyer's beating and massage was quite comfortable. It was much more comfortable than the Abomination's, whose fists were soft and uncomfortable. The destroyer's fists were hard and powerful, more suitable for his steel body. Bronski, who was drinking wine leisurely and basking in the sun in the manor, sneezed. No, we can't go on like this, the destroyer is no match for this mortal. Loki, sitting on the throne, looked gloomy. Although the destroyer has not broken the defense for the time being, if he continues like this, the destroyer will be defeated sooner or later. At that time, let alone killing Thor, it will be a problem whether the destroyer can come back intact. We can only use the second plan. Loki's eyes flashed with madness. Using this method will cause a large number of casualties, and he didn't think of using this method. But who let this mortal ruin his own good things? The mortals of Midgard. If you want to blame you, blame the mortal who stopped me. Loki disconnected and let the destroyer start the automatic mode to entangle Arno. And he was going to complete his crazy plan. But what he didn't know was that after he started the automatic mode of the destroyer, a golden light flashed on the destroyer, and the momentum continued to rise. Loki came to the entrance of the Rainbow Bridge alone and walked to Heimdall, who was guarding the Rainbow Bridge. Will you be loyal to me, Heimdall? Loki held Gungnir and stared at the guardian Heimdall coldly and asked the last question. I am only loyal to Asgard. Heimdall's golden pupils looked at Loki's cold eyes without fear. Even if he knew that this would be the result, Loki couldn't help but feel a little angry. I am the king of Asgard now. You are only temporary. Loki sneered. Sure enough, you have never recognized me. But even if I am only temporary, I am still the king of Asgard. You are relieved of your duties as a guardian. Loki raised Gungnir and pointed at Heimdall. Then I don't have to listen to you anymore. Heimdall slashed at Loki with a sword at lightning speed. He could see every corner of the universe and had long discovered Loki's ill intentions. However, due to his duties as a guardian, he could not attack the king, even if he was a temporary king. But now he is not a guardian. As a friend of Thor, he must stop Loki. But Loki was prepared. The frost box appeared in his left hand, and a gust of cold air instantly froze Heimdall into an ice stick. It turned out that he had already secretly taken the frost box, the artifact of the frost giants that was seized by Odin, from the treasury. He also learned a secret from this. Looking at his left hand that turned blue after holding the frost box, Loki held Gungnir in his right hand even tighter. He, Loki Odinson, the second prince of Asgard, was actually a frost giant. This was undoubtedly a huge stain and shame for him. Is that why you all dislike me so much? Loki thought about the usual injustice, and the crazy idea in his heart became more and more intense. He put away the frost box, and a rainbow light suddenly covered Loki. Jotunheim. A rainbow light fell. In the colorful light, Loki strode out surrounded by many frost giants, and looked up at the blue figure on the throne without any fear. Frost Giant King, Laufey. Frost Giant King Laufey, I'm here to make a deal with you. Loki bowed his head slightly and saluted, with a hint of madness in his eyes. Oh, little new king of Asgard, what deal can you make with me? Lauf looked at Loki below with a mocking smile, not taking this temporary king of the god realm seriously at all. Loki listened to Laufey's mocking tone, lowered his head, and his eyes turned into gloomy viciousness. Let's not beat around the bush, Odin is in a weak period now. I can help you sneak into Asgard and let you kill Odin to take revenge in person, but the condition is that you have to help me sit on the throne of Asgard stably. Loki raised his head with a fake smile. Laufey's mocking smile slowly disappeared when he heard this. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked carefully at Loki with a sincere smile. It must be said that he was moved. Loki controlled him as soon as he opened his mouth, and caught the deepest desire in his heart. But he couldn't just agree to it. What if it was a scam? Asgard has never lacked those cunning gods. Not to mention that the one in front of him is the best among them, the god of trickery, Loki. Oh, you know, even in his weak period, Odin should not be underestimated. Why should I believe that you can help me kill Odin? Because of this. A green light flashed in Loki's hand, and the frost box floated out. Loki is a ruthless man who doesn't talk much. With the first sentence, he controlled Laufey, and with the second sentence, he controlled the entire frost giant clan. Instantly, the frost giants in the entire valley began to riot. This is the artifact of their clan, which has been taken away by Asgard for more than 1,000 years. This made them crazy and wanted to go forward and take back the frost box immediately. Laufey raised his hand to stop the rioting frost giants. He was still rational. He knew that even if everyone rushed forward now, Loki could teleport away with the Rainbow Bridge and couldn't be stopped at all. But his eyes were also burning at this moment, and the only remaining rationality gradually disappeared under the temptation of the frost box. The frost box. Okay, I agree to this deal. How do you want me to help you? Loki's smile widened when he heard this. I need you to send troops to Midgard to kill my brother, Thor. But you should know how powerful my brother is, so in order to protect me, I need you to lead the army to kill him in person. You know, only when he dies can I sit firmly on the throne of Asgard. And as long as you kill him, I will return the frost box to you. Laufey stared at Loki for a while and finally said, that's it. Earth, New Mexico. A black spot appeared in the sky and gradually enlarged. A silver-gray afterimage fell from the sky and smashed several houses, and finally hit a gas station and exploded. Boom! In the fierce flames of the gas station, a tall figure slowly stood up. In the sea of fire, a bright beam of light tore through the raging flames and blasted towards the figure following in the sky. A red light also lit up from the sky and collided with the bright yellow beam. Buzz! Accompanied by a huge buzzing sound, a violent shock wave spread out from the intersection of the two rays to the surroundings, and the surrounding houses and floors were ruthlessly torn like paper. Arno's eyes were illuminated by the heat vision and his mouth couldn't stop rising. What a good toy, it became stronger when I grabbed it to the sky. Not only the strength and speed, but also the energy rays and so on are all enhanced. It can even fly. Great, it has become a more durable toy. This is simply great. A better sandbag than Hulk and Abomination is born. Excited Arno unconsciously increased the output of the heat vision, and directly pushed the destroyer's beam back and pressed him to the ground. Arno shook his head, blinked his burning eyes, and then raised his fist. The destroyer dives to the ground. Boom! Arno blocked with his hands crossed, and the destroyer's huge power made his body plow backwards, leaving hundreds of meters of traces on the ground. Sure enough, not only the strength and speed, but also the reaction speed has become stronger. He was punched and flew away just after he rushed down. Not bad, strong enough. Arno grinned as he felt the strength of his arm. It is much stronger than the power of Hulk and Abomination, but this is interesting. Arno took a step forward, one step of 100 meters, and instantly squatted in front of the destroyer. Sweep the leg. The destroyer was swept down by a kick, and it didn't wait for it to land completely. Football kick. Arno made an illegal move and kicked the destroyer in the head. Boom! With a loud bang, the destroyer was kicked out with a shock wave and flew horizontally into the distance. At the same time, the 4 warriors of Asgard who went with Thor to evacuate the surrounding townspeople suddenly sensed something and looked forward. Buzz! A rainbow bridge that was much wider than the one they came from fell in front of them. Then tall figures with blue skin and red eyes rushed out from the rainbow light. So densely packed that they poured out like blue sea water. Oh my god! Frost giants, there are so many. The 4 fools of Asgard were stunned. One destroyer made them despair. But fortunately, the strong man from Midgard stopped it, but now there are so many frost giants. They wanted to ask with a tingling scalp, are there any mortals like the one just now in Midgard, come to rescue? Arno was about to chase, but suddenly his ears moved, frowned and looked at the town in the distance. The townspeople who had been evacuated by S.H.I.E.L.D. for no reason and refused to cooperate, now saw the ferocious frost giant army appear and ran faster than Bolt. Seeing the dense blue giants chasing the people in the town, he couldn't help but think of a famous Japanese comic. Those S.H.I.E.L.D. idiots haven't evacuated the people for so long. Arno floated and flew towards the town. A hot line of sight fell from the sky and tore a circle of frost giants, saving Barton who was surrounded and in danger. Barton breathed a sigh of relief and was about to thank him, but his excellent eyesight made him look up and instantly saw a small black dot flying behind Arno. "Watch out for your back." Arno also noticed the destroyer flying behind him, turned around and punched him. The iron fists of both sides collided with great power. Dong! The frost giants who surrounded them again were swept away by the huge shock wave in an instant. Along with it, Hawkeye was also swept away. It really made us, Hawkeye, who can't fly, experience the real pleasure of flying like an eagle. After knocking the destroyer away with another punch, Arno frowned at the tragic scene around him. As more and more frost giants poured out of the town below, the SHIELD agents and the local police station were no longer able to resist. Both the numbers and the individual strength of the two sides were not at the same level. Ordinary people could hardly kill the frost giants effectively with their guns, and were soon torn into pieces. All the police officers in the local police station had been killed, and only Coulson and Hawkeye, who had just escaped, were left in SHIELD. A few senior agents were still holding on to the frost giants to protect the civilians from retreating. But they and the remaining townspeople were also surrounded by the frost giants and had no way to escape. "I'm afraid that within 10 minutes, the entire town will be completely slaughtered by the frost giant army. Making my earth so messy." Arno was a little angry. Although he didn't think he was a saint, I could bully the people on my territory but not outsiders. It seems that he has been playing for too long, making the people of the God realm feel that he is also easy to bully. Arno's eyes lit up with a brighter red light than before, and a cruel arc appeared at the corner of his mouth. "No more playing, quick battle." The beam of destruction shot from behind, and Arno turned his head and burst out with a fierce heat vision. One red and one bright yellow energy beam collided, but it only lasted less than a second, and the bright yellow energy beam was completely crushed, and the red light occupied all vision. The scorching heat vision pressed the destroyer's destruction beam directly onto it, and the powerful impact overwhelmed it and continued to impact and oppress it. Arno stopped the heat vision until the upper body of the destroyer was burned red by the heat vision. Bang! With a huge sonic boom, Arno swooped down from the sky with boundless power and knelt hard on the chest of the destroyer. The surrounding area of 1,000 meters was instantly shattered, the ground sank violently, and the town where Arno and the destroyer were located shook violently. The destroyer's red chest was sunken. Without waiting for the destroyer to resist, Arno punched it one after another. The indestructible Uru steel on the destroyer continued to dent under Arno's iron fist. The ground was also sunken by the huge force. The 10-mile radius roared and cracked like a natural disaster, houses continued to collapse, and the scope of the disaster was still spreading around. The creatures around here were in big trouble, either falling into the cracks and dying, or being crushed to death by the collapsed houses. Fortunately, the people in the town had been almost killed by the frost giants at this time, so few people died for this reason. On the contrary, the densely packed frost giants around them could not be avoided or escaped, so there were heavy casualties. The destroyer, who was the focus, was even worse off. Arno punched him repeatedly, and the huge force made it unable to get up. It had no choice but to open its visor again, and the bright yellow light continued to accumulate power, ready to blow Arno away. "Ha!" Arno sneered, and reached his right hand directly into the destroyer's visor, which was accumulating destructive energy. In an instant, the hot energy continued to burn Arno's hand. Even if steel fell into this powerful energy, it would instantly vaporize, but Arno only felt a burning sting in his hand. Arno not only did not let go because of the burning pain, but his other hand also reached into the visor, and the two hands held the destroyer's side armor together. The destroyer felt the crisis, and regardless of the fact that the power accumulation was not yet completed, the bright yellow violent energy directly hit Arno's resolute face. But Arno did not dodge this violent energy, and did not even blink. Facing the burning on his face, he slowly exerted force with both hands. "Die! Tear it apart!" With a low shout, Arno tore the head of the destroyer in half with brute force. Loki, who felt the destroyer losing control, looked back at the last scene, and fear spread in his heart. No, this guy can't be allowed to survive. He is simply not a human. Too scary. Even the destroyer, who was blessed by the power of the gods, was torn apart by this mortal. No, it was the Midgard strongman, so it would be easy to tear myself apart. Loki's hand holding Gungnir was trembling a little, and he walked quickly towards the Rainbow Bridge. Only one step away. My plan will succeed, and I must not retreat at this time. As long as it succeeds, then whether it is this Midgard strongman, Thor, or even the frost giants, they will all disappear together. I am the final winner. Loki looked at the Rainbow Bridge with a crazy look on his face. The beam of destruction dissipated, and Arno stood up and hugged the sun after the battle fell on him, and his body was still emitting hot steam from the destroyer's beam. As the sun shone on him, he consumed the energy and recovered completely in an instant. Arno looked down at the destroyer, whose chest was almost torn, and exclaimed, "What a fair and exciting battle, you were really good." At least it was really good for him, no creature could fight with him to this extent like the destroyer. Destroyer. Next, it's your turn, little bugs. Arno appeared in the sky in an instant, looking down at the blue ocean that almost filled the entire town. In the middle of the blue ocean composed of frost giants, there is a very small vacuum zone. Thor, Coulson, the four fools of Asgard, and several shield agents leaned against the bus, looking at the dense and endless frost giants around them with despair in their eyes. Barton, who only had the last arrow left, sat helplessly on the roof of the bus with the tire pierced by the ice blade. He was about to run out of arrows, which meant that his life was about to come to an end. It seems that the wine I owe you is gone, Arno. The townspeople who survived in the car closed their eyes in despair in the face of such a stunning scene, clasped their hands together and prayed to God for a trace of absurd salvation. Unfortunately, there is no God in heaven, and there is only one person who can stand forever in heaven. The noisy roar of the frost giant army suddenly quieted down. I think it's better to pay for your wine as soon as possible. As the plain voice sounded in everyone's ears, they opened their praying eyes and looked up at the sky. The tall figure in the black cloak brought the purest hope. The hearts of everyone who fell into hell were revitalized in an instant. Just because the person who came was invincible. Arno, you're just in time. Barton let out a long sigh, threw away his beloved bow, and lay down on the roof of the car, smiling at the man who brought salvation in the sky. The bald guy at the scene, our Hydra comrade Sitwell, fainted because of the huge emotional gap. Coulson's eyes were also full of admiration. The position of Captain America in his heart was in jeopardy, and he was about to become Captain Superman. And Thor was worthy of being the god of thunder. Even if he was deprived of his divine power, he was still the one who looked the most mentally healthy among them. He was a spirited young man. Thor shouted happily, "Midgard's strong man, you are so great, I swear I must make you a prince." Sif and the other four suddenly didn't want to recognize this prince who looked like a fool with excitement. Although they were not as exaggerated as Thor, their eyes were full of admiration for Arno. Asgard has always worshipped and respected the strong. Arno just smiled at the reactions of the crowd, and he didn't feel the so-called satisfaction that those superheroes felt after saving people. He turned his head calmly and looked at the frost giants who didn't dare to come forward because of him. The farce should end. Frost giants, so are you afraid of ice? The frost giants didn't understand what he said, but they saw the devastating battle between Arno and the destroyer, and knew that this was a strong man who was not inferior to their Wong Laofei, so they didn't dare to act rashly. Obviously, Arno didn't want to hear their response. As soon as the voice fell, Arno spit out a white cold current from his mouth. Wow! As the cold current spread, from the innermost circle, circles of frost giants were instantly frozen into popsicles and became frozen giants. Other frost giants realized that something was wrong and tried to run back. How happy they were when they came, how fast they ran now. It seems that frost giants are not afraid of ice at all. A trace of satisfaction flashed in Arno's eyes as his curiosity was answered, and then he increased his freezing breath. In an instant, the cold current covered the entire town, and tens of thousands of frost giants were frozen into ice sculptures. The surviving Coulson and others shivered as they watched this shocking frozen miracle. You still say you are not Superman, but now you even have a freezing breath. Not only the survivors, but Nick Fury and Pierce, who were far away in the Triskelion building, were also extremely shocked when they saw this scene in the satellite image. Nick Fury seemed unmoved, but his hand unconsciously held an old-fashioned BB machine in his windbreaker pocket, as if this would give him a sense of security. Pierce smiled helplessly. Sure enough, He didn't test whether he was Superman, but it was the right choice to make friends with him. With freezing breath, it was completely fine to define him as Superman. With so many alien creatures invading, of course, it was not only S.H.I.E.L.D. that was paying attention to them using satellites. The military has also been paying attention. In fact, their army has formed a siege around the town within a radius of 100 miles. But when the military leaders learned that Arno was also among them, they gave up the plan to attack in order not to disturb the interest of the boss. Why do they need their army when the boss is here? Will it increase casualties? After seeing Arno's freezing breath, the military leaders were not too worried. Funny, as if they could rest assured that Arno Stark didn't have freezing breath. Whether there is freezing breath or not, it is not much more difficult for Arno to crush them than to crush an ant. The difference is only the difference between being shot to death by laser, being beaten to death by a punch, or being frozen to death. Wouldn't it be better for them to stay alive and not to have an enemy with Arno? You should know that the last military high-ranking official who had an enemy with Arno not only lost an arm, but his support in Congress has plummeted, and no one dares to support him anymore. The future is bleak, not to mention the different complex feelings in the hearts of the people who are secretly paying attention to this place. The survivors are shivering more and more. Of course, they are not shivering because of Arno's freezing breath, but because it is too cold. The whole town is covered with frost. I'm afraid it's colder than the North Pole now. If this goes on, it won't be long before they all die of body temperature imbalance. Arno also noticed their rapidly decreasing body temperature, especially Patton, who likes to wear sleeveless combat uniforms. Both arms are frozen purple. Arno landed on the roof and threw Barton, who was lying exhausted on the roof, into the car through the window. Then he glanced at Coulson and the others and said, "You guys, go in too." Coulson and the other agents were almost frozen to the point that their lips were purple and they couldn't speak. They could only nod gratefully to Arno and quickly carried the fainted Sitwell in. Although Thor was only wearing a short-sleeved shirt, he didn't look seriously injured. He walked up to Arno and patted his chest generously. "Midgard's strong man, thank you for your help and bravery. When I return to Asgard, I will definitely ask my father for credit for you. If you need my help in the future, please feel free to ask, I will never refuse." Sif and the other four also echoed and thanked him. After all, if it weren't for Arno, they wouldn't be able to bring Thor back, let alone keep him alive. Arno liked Thor's outspoken character and patted him on the shoulder. "Don't worry about it, it's just something that happened to me. If you really want to thank me, then after you recover your divine power, I hope to fight with you and let me see the true power of Thor." Quote, "No problem, I will definitely take back Mjolnir, and then we will have a good fight." Thor would certainly not refuse this. For the Asgardians, fighting with the strong is a great honor. "Well, go in, I'll take you away first." Quote, Thor and the other five nodded and got into the bus decisively. Although they did not lose their fighting power in this extremely cold environment, as warriors, they knew better that their strength could not help Arno, and staying would only cause trouble for him. Driver Chris nodded to Arno and closed the door. Arno looked at the sky above the rainbow bridge and saw another figure coming down. It seemed that the main force was coming. He lifted the bus with one hand and disappeared in an instant. A few seconds later, he appeared out of thin air in the same place. Of course, he would not teleport, it was just an illusion caused by the speed being too fast. Triskelion Building, S.H.I.E.L.D. Headquarters. Many agents took out their pistols and looked at each other in confusion at the bus that appeared out of thin air in front of their own door. "Ah, home." Quote, Barton had just laid down when he was startled by the sound of a gun safety being released. He was also confused when he saw the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters outside the window. "All agents, put down your weapons, remove your guard, and return to your respective posts." A steady voice came, and a black boiled egg appeared in front of everyone. "Okay, Agent Coulson, Agent Barton, tell me what's going on." Not to mention a certain suspicious-minded boiled egg in S.H.I.E.L.D. Arno returned at the right time, and a tall blue figure just walked out of the rainbow bridge. Laufey walked out slowly, with his hands open and his eyes closed, ready to welcome the cheers of his people. But the world was silent, with only a gust of cold wind blowing. Quote, how could Midgard be so cold? Even colder than Jotunheim. Laufey suddenly realized something was wrong. Why was it so quiet? He opened his eyes abruptly and saw a shocking scene. As he had guessed, his people had occupied the entire town where Thor was. But why were they all ice sculptures? He turned his head abruptly and looked at the black figure that stood out among the ice sculptures. Who are you? Quote. Loki stared at the Midgardian who was looking at him curiously, and the blue hairs on his body stood up. He will die. He will die. He will die. He looks ordinary, but his sixth sense is giving him a crazy death warning. You don't look much different from an ordinary frost giant. In Arno's eyes, Loki's muscles, internal organs and skeleton were extremely clear. In his opinion, this king of frost giants is only a little stronger than ordinary frost giants except for the energy in his body, and there is not much difference. As the legendary king of frost giants just like this. Quote. Loki was a little angry when he saw Arno's disappointed look. If he had seen this strong man who could freeze tens of thousands of frost giants before, he might have retreated because he lost the frost box. But it's different now. Loki sneered with a crooked mouth. Midgardians, you will pay a heavy price for your ignorance and disrespect to the king of frost giants. The frost box appeared in his hand. That's right, Loki gave him the frost box in advance so that he could lead the army to attack Midgard and kill Thor without worry. Although he felt that Loki's behavior was stupid, he thought that he would have to rely on Loki to go to Asgard to kill Odin later, so he didn't take the thing and do nothing. After all, in his opinion, with the frost box, he dared to fight Odin, not to mention Thor, the god of thunder. He even planned to give Asgard a chance that he would return to his prime. The return of the horse's power. That is to let the army slaughter all the people in his place in front of Thor, let the 9 realms see that Asgard has no ability to control the 9 realms. He, Laufey, can kill his people in front of Thor, the heir to the throne of Asgard, and he can't do anything. The result is not as expected. He didn't expect that Midgard, which is at the bottom of the ranking, actually has a super strong man who can freeze tens of thousands of troops. And the powerful pressure on his body is no less than the oppression Odin gave him back then. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.